Far beneath the surface of the ocean, where the light from above drifts down gently like 1,000 silver ribbons, there sits a little home that looks unlike any other. It is bright, cheerful, and shaped like a pineapple. To most who pass by, it seems unusual. After all, who would expect a fruit to rest on the sandy floor of Bikini Bottom? But to one little sponge, it is the coziest, warmest place in the entire sea. This is the place where SpongeBob SquarePants grew up, and where so many of his earliest memories began. Inside the pineapple house, things were always filled with a special kind of comfort. The walls carried the soft scent of seawater and the faint sweetness of the fruit that once grew above the waves. The round windows let in gentle light that shimmered through the ocean currents, casting dancing shapes across the floor. The furniture was simple but full of character. A cushioned chair perfect for daydreaming, a little round table where sketches and seashells were often scattered, and a cozy bed tucked into a corner where SpongeBob would curl up at the end of each day. From a very young age, SpongeBob had a heart that glowed with curiosity. He would wake up early, long before the rest of the town stirred, just to sit by his window and watch the soft movements of the ocean. The kelp swayed back and forth like lullabies, and small schools of fish drifted past in quiet patterns. Sometimes he would press his round little face against the glass and imagine what adventures might be waiting for him just beyond the edge of his street. SpongeBob was never in a hurry. His days moved slowly, filled with little wonders. He would wander from room to room, humming to himself in that gentle, high-pitched way of his. The kitchen was one of his favorite spots. Even as a child, he loved the comfort of cooking. He would stand on a small stool, carefully stirring a bowl, with too much excitement and not quite enough precision. Sometimes his recipes didn't turn out as expected. A cake that wobbled, a soup that tasted a bit too salty. But he didn't mind. For him, the joy was in the trying, in the feeling of creating something with his hands. The living room carried its own memories, too. SpongeBob liked to stack little piles of shells, arranging them in patterns that only made sense to him. He would sit cross-legged on the rug, humming, while he built towers that leaned slightly but never toppled. To him, they were castles, places where sea princesses lived, or forts that guarded treasure. And when he grew tired of building, he would lie back, staring at the ceiling, and imagine himself exploring faraway reefs filled with glowing creatures. What made his home truly special was not just the furniture or the walls, but the feeling it gave him. The pineapple was a shelter, a place of calm in the bustling world of Bikini Bottom. When SpongeBob was small, he often felt that the sea outside was big, almost too big, and maybe even a little intimidating. But in his home, he felt safe. The quiet corners reminded him that it was okay to rest, that not every day needed to be filled with noise or busyness. One of his favorite routines was bedtime. The evening would settle slowly, the ocean outside dimming into deep shades of blue. Through his window, tiny specks of light, plankton glowing faintly, would drift like stars. SpongeBob loved lying in bed wrapped in his blanket, listening to the soft crackle of bubbles rising somewhere far away. Sometimes he would whisper his dreams aloud, as though the ocean itself might be listening. He would talk about wanting to meet every jellyfish, about wanting to make the best food anyone had ever tasted, or simply about wanting to spend his days laughing with friends he hadn't met yet. His childhood nights were never rushed. He would blink slowly, letting his eyes grow heavier with each passing minute, until sleep carried him into gentle dreams. And often, those dreams felt just as real as his waking hours. He would dream of floating higher than the tallest coral towers or drifting across fields of glowing kelp that swayed endlessly, welcoming him deeper into the ocean. But morning always came again, soft and unhurried. SpongeBob would wake with a smile, stretching his arms wide as though he could hug the whole world. His little feet would tap against the floor as he shuffled toward the kitchen, already excited for another simple breakfast. Sometimes it was seaweed cereal. Sometimes it was toast, spread with jelly. And sometimes he would simply pour a glass of seawater and giggle at the way the bubbles tickled his nose. Each day began with small rituals that gave him comfort. SpongeBob believed that even the tiniest routines were worth celebrating. He loved brushing his teeth in front of the mirror, making silly faces at himself until he laughed. He enjoyed polishing his little shoes until they shone, even if he was only going to walk across the sandy street. And he always took a moment to stand by his window, watching the ocean stir awake and whispering a quiet good morning to the world outside. The Pineapple House wasn't just a home. It was a place where a little sponge's imagination bloomed, where the quiet moments mattered just as much as the big ones. And though SpongeBob didn't yet know where life would take him, he carried within himself a deep sense of joy, born from these early days in the soft, glowing calm of his pineapple home. Though SpongeBob's pineapple home was quiet, it was never lonely. The little sponge filled the space with his laughter, his imagination, and his endless curiosity. Even the smallest things became adventures. A drifting bubble, rising gently from some unseen crack in the floor, could capture his attention for minutes at a time. He would chase it slowly through the rooms, watching it bob and dance in the still water, his giggles echoing softly until the bubble finally popped. And though it lasted only a second, SpongeBob would clap his hands, delighted, as if he had just witnessed a miracle. The kitchen, especially, was a playground of discovery. SpongeBob liked to open every cupboard, peeking inside as though each one hid a secret. Sometimes he would find a box of cereal, sometimes an old pot that made a funny sound when he tapped it, and sometimes nothing at all. But no matter what he found, he would pretend it was something magical. A cereal box became treasure. A pot became a drum. And when the cupboards were empty, he imagined invisible ingredients waiting to be stirred into imaginary dishes. Cooking had always fascinated him. Even before he knew about Krabby Patties, SpongeBob believed food carried happiness inside it. He would carefully slice sea cucumbers, arrange kelp leaves in neat rows, and stir little bowls of bubbling broth that never quite came out the same twice. Sometimes the results were strange, soups that were too sour, sandwiches that fell apart in his hands, but his joy never faded. For SpongeBob, it was the process, the act of creating that mattered. And he always ate his experiments with a smile, whispering to himself that one day he would make something truly special. When he wasn't cooking or building shell towers, SpongeBob loved to draw. His small hands weren't always steady, but his imagination was boundless. With a simple crayon, he filled scraps of paper with sketches of jellyfish, of smiling starfish, and of grand underwater castles made from coral and sand. Sometimes his drawings were little maps, leading from the Pineapple House to places he had never been. In his mind, each map promised an adventure waiting for him just beyond the horizon. But his home was more than a place for play. It was also a place of comfort when the outside world felt overwhelming. Even as a child, SpongeBob had moments where the sea seemed too big, too full of noise and movement. On those days, he would retreat to the quiet corners of his pineapple, curling up in his chair with a pillow hugged tight against his chest. There he would listen to the steady hum of the ocean beyond the walls, the sound reminding him that he was safe, that he belonged exactly where he was. One of his favorite spots in the house was the window near his bed. From there, he could watch the shifting colors of the ocean as the day moved along. In the morning, soft golds drifted through the water, catching on the sandy ground and making everything shimmer. By afternoon, the light grew brighter, filtering in strong beams that lit up his room. And in the evening, everything softened again. The blues deepening, the currents slowing, until only the quiet glow of bioluminescent plankton remained. SpongeBob never tired of these simple changes. To him, they felt like the ocean's way of singing him a lullaby. Sometimes, when the light dimmed and the house grew hushed, SpongeBob would take out a little notebook he kept under his pillow. It wasn't filled with words just yet. Writing would come later, but with doodles, shapes, and little swirls that meant something only to him. The notebook was his secret treasure, a place where he could capture his dreams before they floated away. On its pages, jellyfish drifted across wide fields. Starfish danced under glowing moons, and pineapples grew into castles that touched the very roof of the sea. Even as a small sponge, SpongeBob carried a heart that looked for joy in every moment. If a floorboard creaked, he would laugh, imagining it was the voice of the house saying hello. If a bubble popped, he pretended it was a tiny firework, celebrating something special. If the fridge hummed too loudly, he would sway to its rhythm, turning the sound into a gentle song. To SpongeBob, his pineapple wasn't just walls and rooms, it was alive, a friend that kept him company, holding his dreams safely within. At night, when the current slowed and the ocean quieted, SpongeBob would snuggle under his blanket, his little body sinking into the soft mattress. The walls of the pineapple glowed faintly with the shimmer of moonlight filtering through the sea. He would breathe slowly, his round cheeks rising and falling, until sleep began to wrap around him like a gentle tide. And always, before his eyes closed fully, he would whisper one last thought, a wish for the adventures tomorrow might bring. Sometimes it was a wish to see a new kind of fish. Sometimes it was a wish to taste something delicious. And sometimes it was simply a wish to laugh, to smile, to find joy in the little things. The pineapple house listened. It held these whispers quietly, like secrets kept safe within its walls. And in the silence of the night, SpongeBob's dreams would bloom, carrying him into faraway places where every jellyfish sparkled, every coral reef glowed, and every moment was filled with gentle wonder. The days inside his pineapple home flowed one into the next like a soft, endless melody. Each sunrise brought him back to the same cozy rooms, to the same chair, the same little bed, and the same familiar walls. Yet nothing ever felt ordinary to SpongeBob. Every morning was new. Every meal was an adventure. Every corner of his home was a treasure chest waiting to be opened. And though he was still just a little sponge, not yet the fry cook of the Krusty Krab, not yet the best friend of a starfish or the neighbor of a grumpy octopus, his story had already begun. It began not with big events or grand adventures, but with the quiet, gentle rhythms of life inside a pineapple under the sea. The little pineapple house held a rhythm of its own, a gentle heartbeat that seemed to guide SpongeBob's days. It wasn't loud or hurried. It was steady, calm, and reassuring. When SpongeBob was very young, he would sometimes pause in the middle of play, sit down on the cool, sandy floor, and simply listen. The house creaked softly when the ocean current brushed against its walls. The floorboards hummed faintly with the shifting tide, and tiny bubbles whispered through hidden cracks. These sounds became his lullabies, the background music of his earliest years. He often pretended his home was alive, a guardian that watched over him with kindness. To SpongeBob, the walls were not just walls, they were arms that sheltered him. The roof wasn't just a roof. It was the umbrella that kept him safe from the endless waters above. And when the windows glowed with soft light, he believed his home was smiling, happy to see him exploring and dreaming. This belief filled SpongeBob with a sense of belonging, of never truly being alone. Every corner of the pineapple had a story. In the living room, SpongeBob would build forts out of pillows and blankets, crawling inside to create secret hideouts where his imagination soared. Sometimes the fort was a submarine, drifting through deep, mysterious trenches. Other times it was a castle, where he was the brave knight protecting his kingdom of shells. And sometimes it was simply a cozy cave where he could curl up and whisper his thoughts to the quiet, knowing walls. The kitchen carried stories, too. SpongeBob's first experiments with food were often messy, but the mess was part of the joy. Flour would puff into the water, floating like tiny snowflakes, while drops of jelly spread into swirls of color. He would giggle as he stirred too quickly, sending bubbles tumbling out of the bowl. Even when the taste wasn't quite right, SpongeBob never saw it as a failure. Instead, he would nod to himself and say softly, "I'll try again tomorrow." His pineapple kitchen was a classroom, a place where he learned patience, creativity, and the magic of turning simple things into something special. The bedroom was his quiet sanctuary. SpongeBob loved his small bed with its soft blanket patterned with little bubbles stitched across it. Before falling asleep, he would often sit cross-legged on the mattress, holding a toy or a book, and let his thoughts wander. Sometimes he spoke aloud, telling his dreams to the empty room. Other times he whispered secrets into the dark, secrets no one else would ever know, like how he wished the jellyfish could talk, or how he wondered if the stars above the ocean looked down and smiled at him. As SpongeBob grew, the pineapple house seemed to grow with him. Shelves slowly filled with treasures, shells polished smooth by the sea, tiny jars of colored sand, little notes and doodles he tucked away like keepsakes. Each object carried a memory, a piece of his story. A shell wasn't just a shell. It was the one he found on a day when the water sparkled brighter than usual. A jar of sand wasn't just sand. It was from a day he and Patrick played by the shore until the sun disappeared. Every item was a reminder that his world was full of beauty, if only he looked closely enough. On quiet afternoons, SpongeBob would sometimes lie on the living room floor, his arms stretched wide, and stare at the ceiling. He would let his mind drift, imagining adventures far beyond his pineapple walls. In those daydreams, he was an explorer, discovering hidden caves glowing with crystals. He was an inventor, creating strange machines powered by jellyfish energy. He was a friend to creatures no one else had ever seen. Gentle giants, tiny glowing fish, even talking seahorses that told stories in voices soft as the tide. These daydreams never ended with fear or worry. They always circled back to joy, to laughter, to the comfort of coming home. The pineapple house was not only a space for dreams, but also for learning how to be himself. In its quiet rooms, SpongeBob discovered the value of kindness, first to himself and then to others. If he spilled something, he didn't scold himself. He smiled, cleaned it up, and whispered, "That's okay." If he built a tower that fell over, he giggled, stacked the shells again, and found new joy in the rebuilding. These small lessons planted deep roots in him, shaping the cheerful sponge he would become. Evening always brought a special kind of peace. The world outside slowed down, and the currents brushed past his windows like gentle whispers. SpongeBob often sat in his chair with a cup of warm kelp tea, holding it carefully in both hands, enjoying the way the steam curled upward before fading into the water. He would sip slowly, humming softly, his eyes half closed as though listening to a song only he could hear. Then, when his cup was empty, he would rise, tidy up his little home, and prepare for rest. Night in the pineapple was a gentle cocoon. The shadows stretched long across the rooms, the glow of bioluminescent plankton outside flickering like stars, and the quiet pressed in like a soft blanket. SpongeBob would slip into bed, pull the covers up to his chin, and breathe deeply, letting the stillness sink in. Sometimes he fell asleep quickly, dreams carrying him away almost at once, and other times he lingered on the edge of sleep, gazing out the window, his eyes heavy but curious. And in those moments he often felt the most grateful. Grateful for his little home, grateful for the small wonders of the day, grateful simply to be SpongeBob SquarePants, a little sponge with a big heart in a pineapple under the sea. And so, night after night, the cycle continued. Days of play, of dreaming, of small adventures within his home, followed by evenings of calm, of reflection, of drifting into sleep. These were the gentle beginnings of a life filled with laughter, love, and endless curiosity. Long before Krabby Patties, long before jellyfishing trips with Patrick, long before adventures with Squidward and Sandy, there was just SpongeBob and his pineapple, living softly, dreaming deeply, and smiling at the quiet beauty of his little world. The days inside SpongeBob's pineapple home often blended together, not because they were dull, but because each one carried the same gentle rhythm of comfort. His little world was never about grand surprises or sudden changes. Instead, it was made of steady patterns, routines that wrapped around him like the softest blanket. It was these patterns that shaped his earliest years, giving him a sense of peace and purpose. Mornings always began with brightness. Even under the sea, the sunlight from above filtered down in golden rays, slipping through his round windows and scattering across the floor. SpongeBob would open his eyes slowly, blinking as though the light itself were calling him to rise. He never leapt out of bed right away. Instead, he would stretch, arms reaching toward the ceiling, toes curling, and a soft yawn drifting from his mouth. For a moment, he would simply lie there, smiling at the day before it had even begun. After washing up and brushing his teeth, always humming to himself as bubbles fizzed from his mouth, he would pad into the kitchen. Breakfast was never rushed. Sometimes it was kelp cereal, crunchy and cheerful. Sometimes it was a sandwich stacked high with seaweed and jelly. And sometimes it was something simple like toast and tea. But no matter what he made, SpongeBob always took his time, savoring each bite, as if even the smallest meal deserved appreciation. His pineapple kitchen, with its bright counters and neatly stacked dishes, became the stage where he practiced gratitude each morning. Once breakfast was finished, the day stretched out before him like an open book. There was no schedule pressing on him, no rush, only the freedom to explore. Some days he spent hours at the window, watching the ocean move. The schools of fish gliding past fascinated him, their bodies shimmering like living ribbons. He often imagined they were travelers coming from faraway places he had yet to see. Other days he filled his time with creativity, building little forts, sketching in his notebook, or trying new recipes. And on certain afternoons, when the house felt especially calm, he would simply wander from room to room, humming softly, feeling grateful to have a place that felt so alive. What made these moments special wasn't what happened, but how he felt. SpongeBob carried with him an endless sense of wonder, one that turned even ordinary hours into treasures. If a bubble floated past his chair, it wasn't just a bubble. It was a tiny messenger from the sea, reminding him of the beauty in simple things. If a shadow passed across the floor, he imagined it was the ocean's way of telling a story, a moving picture painted by light and current. To anyone else, the house might have seemed quiet, uneventful. But to SpongeBob, it was alive with meaning. The afternoons were slower, softer. The light shifted into cooler blues, the water outside settling into a calm rhythm. SpongeBob often felt this was the best time to rest. He would curl up in his chair with a pillow or stretch out on the rug, his eyes half closed. He didn't always fall asleep, but he didn't need to. Sometimes resting was simply about being still, about listening to the quiet pulse of the ocean beyond his walls. The house seemed to breathe with him as though it too were content to pause. Evenings were tender and hushed. As the ocean darkened, SpongeBob prepared himself for night in his own careful way. He would tidy up the rooms, putting away toys, dishes, and papers, as though he wanted his home to sleep peacefully too. He would light a small lamp, its glow filling the pineapple with warmth, and then he would sit quietly in his chair with his notebook. Some nights he drew, other nights he simply doodled swirls and bubbles, and sometimes he just rested the pencil on the page, lost in thought, the simple act of holding it enough to make him feel creative. When the time came to sleep, he approached it with the same joy he brought to everything else. SpongeBob didn't see bedtime as the end of a day, but as the beginning of a new adventure, the adventure of dreaming. He would slip beneath his blanket, tuck himself in snugly, and close his eyes with a smile. The walls around him glowed faintly from the plankton outside, like stars pressed close against the glass. The sound of the sea grew faint and steady, a lullaby sung just for him. And as he drifted, he often thought of what tomorrow might hold. Sometimes he imagined a tomorrow where he would discover a new type of jellyfish. Sometimes he pictured himself cooking something so delicious that everyone in Bikini Bottom would smile. And sometimes the dream was simple. Another day of laughter, another day of curiosity, another day in his pineapple home. These thoughts carried him gently into sleep, where dreams unfolded like stories waiting to be told. Night after night, year after year, these small, tender moments wove themselves into the fabric of his life. They were not grand adventures, nor loud or dramatic events, but they were the foundation of who SpongeBob became. A little sponge, living in a pineapple under the sea, who found happiness in the quiet, who believed in the magic of the small, and who carried that joy into every corner of his future. And though the world outside his home was vast and full of unknowns, SpongeBob never felt afraid, because he knew that no matter what tomorrow brought, whether it was success, failure, laughter, or tears, his pineapple would always be there, waiting, steady and true. It was not just his house. It was his beginning, his safe place, his first story. And so, beneath the soft waves and glowing light of Bikini Bottom, the pineapple stood quietly, sheltering a sponge with dreams too big to count, and a heart too full to measure. Within its walls, SpongeBob's earliest days unfolded gently, each one a stepping stone toward the life he would someday lead. The pineapple was more than a home. It was the gentle cradle of his imagination, the keeper of his secrets, and the quiet witness to the very first chapters of his extraordinary, joyful life. SpongeBob had always been a little sponge with a big imagination. Even in his earliest years, long before he knew what the Krusty Krab was or what it meant to be a fry cook, he dreamed in colors brighter than the sea itself. His world was small, just his pineapple home, the sandy street outside, and the fields and reefs that stretched gently beyond, but his thoughts traveled farther than he ever could. Every morning, after his simple breakfast and his quiet routines, SpongeBob would sit near his window and let his mind wander. The ocean outside was alive with movement, currents drifting, fish swimming, jellyfish floating lazily. To most, it was an ordinary sight, but to SpongeBob, each detail carried endless possibility. He imagined the fish were secret travelers coming from coral kingdoms hidden in faraway places. He believed the jellyfish were messengers of joy, drifting across the sea to deliver happiness to anyone who cared to chase them. Even the swaying kelp fascinated him, each stalk like a waving hand, as though the ocean itself was saying hello. These little daydreams grew into something larger. SpongeBob didn't just see the world as it was, he saw it as it could be. When he built towers of shells in his living room, he wasn't just stacking objects. In his mind, he was building castles with tall spires and glowing windows. When he doodled in his notebook, it wasn't just shapes and scribbles. They were maps of places he longed to explore, full of caves, treasure, and mysteries waiting for him. And when he cooked his funny little meals, spilling flour or dropping kelp leaves into bubbling pots, he wasn't just playing. He was practicing for the day when he might cook something that could make the whole world smile. But SpongeBob's dreams weren't only about things. They were about feelings, too. He dreamed of friendship even before Patrick became his best pal. Sometimes, sitting alone in his fort of pillows, he would whisper to himself about a friend he hadn't met yet. Someone who would laugh with him, go on adventures with him, and share jellyfishing nets in wide-open fields. Other times, he imagined standing in front of a crowd, serving food he had made, watching everyone's faces light up with joy. His heart longed not just to live, but to share, to spread happiness in every corner of the sea. His daydreams often came in waves. In the morning, they were bright and playful, filled with excitement. By afternoon, they grew softer, slower, like long, drifting thoughts. SpongeBob would lie on the floor with his notebook resting on his chest, staring at the ceiling while imagining adventures so vivid they almost felt real. He dreamed of swimming alongside giant turtles that carried entire reefs on their backs. He dreamed of discovering an underwater mountain that touched the surface, its peak shining in the sunlight above. He dreamed of floating through fields of glowing jellyfish that stretched farther than the eye could see, each one lighting his path like a lantern. And sometimes his dreams were simple. He imagined a tomorrow where he learned something new at boating school, or a tomorrow where he made someone laugh so hard that they forgot their worries, or a tomorrow where he cooked the perfect breakfast without spilling a drop. To SpongeBob, even the smallest hopes were worth dreaming about, because each one felt like a promise of joy to come. What made SpongeBob's dreams so special was the way he believed in them. To him, nothing was too silly or too impossible. He never doubted that one day his little ideas could become real. If he dreamed of making the best food in the ocean, then someday he would. If he dreamed of being the greatest jellyfisher, then someday he would. And if he dreamed of a life filled with laughter, then every step he took would bring him closer to it. His belief was steady and unshaken, like a flame that never dimmed, no matter how deep the water grew. Of course, not every day was full of bright adventure. Some days were quiet, even lonely. SpongeBob didn't always have someone to share his thoughts with, but he didn't mind. In those moments, his dreams became his closest friends. They kept him company, warmed his heart, and reminded him that even in silence, his life was rich with meaning. His imagination turned stillness into stories, and stories into joy. In his pineapple home, he kept these dreams tucked into every corner. They lived in the doodles pinned to his wall, in the shells stacked on his shelf, and in the recipes scribbled on scraps of paper. They floated in the bubbles he chased across the room, and they whispered in the soft creaks of the floor at night. SpongeBob's home wasn't just where he lived. It was the garden where his dreams grew, watered by his endless wonder and tended by his gentle heart. And so day after day, the little sponge carried big dreams inside him. He didn't yet know the path his life would take. He didn't yet know about the crusty crab, or about the friends who would one day fill his life with love and laughter. But already, deep in his heart, he carried the seeds of who he would become: a dreamer, a friend, a believer in the simple magic of happiness. The ocean has always been a vast place, filled with wonders and mysteries. To many creatures, it was too large to think about all at once. But for SpongeBob, even as a little sponge, the ocean was not frightening. It was inspiring. He did not see its size as something to fear, but as an invitation. Every ripple, every shimmer of light across the water seemed to whisper to him, "There is more to see, more to know, more to dream about." He would often sit on the sandy ground outside his pineapple home, his tiny notebook resting on his lap. With a crayon clutched tightly in his hand, he would sketch whatever his imagination called for that day. Sometimes it was a jellyfish with wings soaring across the ocean currents. Other times it was a seahorse shaped like a cloud, carrying him on adventures high above the reefs. And sometimes his drawings were of himself, always smiling, always reaching out toward something new. When he wasn't drawing, SpongeBob loved to collect little treasures from the ocean floor. Every shell, every pebble, seemed to hold a secret. A smooth, spiral shell became a magic horn in his mind, one that could summon friendly dolphins. A pebble shaped like a heart became a charm for friendship, something he promised to give to the best friend he knew that he would one day meet. He didn't need the treasures to be valuable in anyone else's eyes. They were valuable because they carried his dreams. And his dreams were not only about what he could find in the world, but about who he could become. Sometimes, when the ocean was especially quiet, he would close his eyes and imagine himself standing proudly in a uniform, serving food with care and love. He didn't yet know it would be Krabby Patties or that the crusty crab would become his home away from home. But even then he felt that cooking was part of his purpose. In his heart, he believed food wasn't just food. It was a way to share happiness. Every dish he imagined carried not only flavor, but also kindness, laughter, and joy. Other times, SpongeBob dreamed of adventure. He pictured himself traveling through coral canyons with jellyfish swirling around him like glowing lanterns. He imagined swimming into caves where the walls sparkled with crystals, their light guiding him deeper. He thought of discovering underwater mountains, their peaks hidden in the shadows, waiting for him to climb. And always in these dreams he was smiling, because no matter where he went, he carried joy with him. But perhaps his most cherished dream of all was friendship. Even as a little sponge, before Patrick or Sandy or Squidward were part of his life, SpongeBob longed for companionship. He would talk aloud in his home, imagining conversations with friends he hadn't met yet. He would say things like, "Do you want to go jellyfishing? Or let's build a sandcastle together." And though the room was quiet, he laughed anyway, because in his heart, he could already feel the warmth of those friendships. The ocean currents seemed to encourage his dreaming. Some days they moved quickly, filling him with energy as though they were pushing him toward adventure. Other days they drifted slowly, gently rocking him into calm reflection. SpongeBob felt connected to these rhythms as though the sea itself understood him. It was as if the ocean whispered, "Keep dreaming, keep imagining. One day, these dreams will carry you farther than you know." Inside his pineapple, his imagination filled every corner. The chair became a throne. The kitchen table became a captain's desk on a ship. His bed became a raft floating through uncharted waters. Even when he was alone, he was never lonely, because his dreams were his constant companions. And while many creatures might have let such dreams fade as they grew older, SpongeBob never did. His belief in them was steady, almost unshakable. He held on to them tightly, the way some might hold on to a prized treasure. To him, dreaming wasn't just something to do when the day was slow. It was part of living, part of breathing, part of being SpongeBob. On certain nights, when the ocean outside was calm and his room glowed faintly with the light of plankton, SpongeBob would whisper his biggest dreams aloud just before sleep. He whispered of wanting to learn, wanting to grow, wanting to share kindness with every creature he met. He didn't know how or when these dreams would come true, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he believed in them with all his heart. And so, in his quiet little world, SpongeBob's dreams grew brighter and stronger. They were not just ideas floating through his mind. They were the seeds of who he was meant to become. Every bubble he chased, every doodle he drew, every shell he collected, all of it carried him closer to the life he imagined. And though he was just a small sponge in a pineapple house, his dreams were already larger than the ocean itself. As the days passed in his pineapple home, SpongeBob's imagination only grew. It was as if every bubble, every ripple, every shifting shadow in the water carried a spark of inspiration. He never let a moment slip by without wondering, what if? What if a jellyfish could glow brighter than the moon? What if a coral reef could stretch forever, like a maze that no sponge had ever finished exploring? What if laughter itself could float through the sea like bubbles, reaching creatures far away to remind them that joy still existed? His what-ifs shaped his days. Whenever he played, built, or created, there was always a story behind it. A simple pillow fort wasn't just a pile of cushions. It was a submarine, guiding him to hidden treasure beneath the sand. A wooden spoon in the kitchen wasn't just for stirring. It was a magic wand that could turn broth into potions and sandwiches into feasts fit for kings. Even his mop and bucket, resting quietly in the corner, became partners in adventure. Sometimes the bucket was a brave knight, and the mop was a noble horse, galloping into great quests across the living room floor. But what mattered most wasn't just the stories he told. It was how he carried them, with joy, with patience, with an open heart. He never worried about whether his dreams were too big or too small. To SpongeBob, they were perfect simply because they existed. And in the silence of his pineapple, he nurtured them as carefully as one might nurture a garden. The ocean itself seemed to encourage him. On days when sunlight filtered down strong and bright, SpongeBob's dreams took on energy. He would dash from room to room, pretending he was racing through coral tunnels, his laughter echoing like bells. On days when the sea was dim and the current slow, his dreams became quieter, softer. He would curl up with his notebook, doodling lazy swirls and gentle shapes, letting his thoughts drift like jellyfish in the tide. Both moods felt important to him. The excitement and the calm worked together, balancing his world and giving his dreams depth. Sometimes SpongeBob would walk just beyond his home, onto the sandy ground outside. From there, he could see the edge of Jellyfish Fields in the distance. Even before he spent entire afternoons there, he loved imagining what it might be like to wander through that glowing meadow. In his mind, the jellyfish weren't just floating creatures. They were guardians of secrets, keepers of the ocean's laughter. He promised himself that one day he would learn their ways, that he would understand why they glowed, why they danced, and what it felt like to drift so free on the currents. At other times, his eyes turned toward the rest of Bikini Bottom. Though he was still just a little sponge, the thought of a bustling town filled with restaurants, shops, and neighbors filled him with curiosity. He wondered about the smells that floated from the Krusty Krab, even before he ever set foot inside. He imagined the tall stacks of patties, the sizzling of the grill, and the smiles on customers' faces. Though it was only a dream then, something deep inside him stirred, a sense that this, somehow, would be part of his story. And yet, for all his big dreams, SpongeBob also cherished the small ones. He dreamed of baking a cake that didn't collapse. He dreamed of tying his shoes in one try. He dreamed of meeting someone who would laugh at his jokes, no matter how silly they were. To him, these dreams were just as important as the grand ones. For SpongeBob, happiness wasn't about size, it was about meaning. If a dream could bring a smile, then it was worth holding close. Evenings often carried him deeper into this gentle dreaming. As the water outside grew darker, he would lie in his bed, blanket tucked snugly around him, and let his mind drift. The room was quiet, but his thoughts were busy with warmth. Sometimes he pictured himself standing proudly in a uniform, spatula in hand, cooking food that made everyone's day brighter. Other times he imagined himself laughing with friends under the stars, their voices rising like bubbles into the endless night. And sometimes he didn't imagine anything at all. He simply let the feeling of hope surround him, a steady glow inside his chest, like a light that never dimmed. There were nights when he stayed awake just a little longer, whispering to the ocean as though it could hear him. He whispered his thanks for the day, his excitement for tomorrow, and his dreams for the future. Though the sea never spoke back, SpongeBob felt it listening, felt it cradling his words in the quiet currents. To him, the ocean was not empty. It was a friend, one that carried his dreams gently along, keeping them safe until he was ready to live them. And so, little by little, SpongeBob's big dreams took root. They lived in his drawings, his stories, his laughter, and his whispered wishes. They shaped the way he saw the world, not as a place of limits, but as a place of endless possibility. And though he was still small, still learning, still finding his way, SpongeBob carried himself with the quiet certainty that one day his dreams would blossom into something real. Dreams, no matter how big or small, have a way of shaping the path ahead. For little SpongeBob, they were not only gentle companions, they were guiding stars. Though he didn't realize it then, each dream carried him closer to the life he was meant to live. One afternoon, as soft rays of sunlight drifted through the water, SpongeBob sat cross-legged on the floor of his room. In front of him lay his favorite treasure box, a simple tin container where he stored all the shells, pebbles, and doodles that held meaning to him. He carefully opened it, smiling at the collection inside. Each item carried a story. The spiral shell reminded him of the time he had imagined blowing into it and calling forth a parade of friendly sea creatures. The pebbles shaped like a star reminded him of his dream of one day meeting a best friend, someone who would share his laughter and his adventures. And the small scrap of paper, crumpled but kept safe, carried a sketch of a restaurant with smiling customers, their plates stacked high with food. SpongeBob pressed his hands together as if cradling the dream itself. To most, it was just a tin box filled with little things. To SpongeBob, it was a garden of possibility. Each time he opened it, he felt the quiet reminder that dreams didn't fade when held with love. They grew brighter, stronger, waiting patiently for their moment to shine. There were days, of course, when SpongeBob's dreams felt far away. Sometimes his imagination outpaced his abilities, like the day he tried to bake a towering cake, only for it to wobble and fall flat. Or the time he tried to sketch an entire underwater city, only to find his crayons running out before he could finish. In those moments, his heart sank for just a while. But he always reminded himself, dreams are not about getting everything right. They are about holding on, even when things don't go perfectly. And so he never let disappointment take root. Instead, he laughed at his own missteps, dusted himself off, and tried again. For SpongeBob, failure was not the end of a dream. It was simply part of the adventure. And even on the hardest days, he carried an unshakable belief that tomorrow held another chance, another beginning. Sometimes, when the ocean currents grew restless, SpongeBob would press his face against the round window of his pineapple home and watch the sea move. He saw the shifting patterns of fish swimming by, the swirl of sand kicked up from the seabed, and the way the kelp bent and swayed. It reminded him that the world was always changing, always moving forward. And so he thought, perhaps dreams were like that too. They might twist, turn, or drift in new directions, but they never stopped flowing. On especially quiet nights, when the sea outside was still and the stars above twinkled faintly through the water, SpongeBob would close his eyes and imagine a future version of himself. He imagined walking into town, cheerful and confident, greeting everyone with his wide, happy smile. He pictured himself standing behind a counter, spatula in hand, proudly cooking meals that made others happy. He even imagined moments of laughter with friends he hadn't met yet, but whom he already loved in his heart. Though he was just a little sponge then, SpongeBob believed with certainty that the life ahead of him would be filled with joy. Not because everything would be easy, but because he was determined to meet every challenge with kindness and every setback with hope. His dreams were not distant wishes. They were promises to himself, promises that one day he would live with joy, serve with love, and laugh without holding back. And as he nestled into bed, pulling his blanket close, those promises comforted him more than anything else. The sea hummed softly outside, like a lullaby sung by the ocean itself. The gentle sway of the water reminded him that tomorrow was waiting, full of new chances to dream again. His breathing slowed, his eyelids grew heavy, and the little sponge drifted into sleep. And even as he slept, his dreams kept floating, drifting upward like glowing bubbles, carrying his hopes into the wide, endless sea. Because that is who SpongeBob was, even from the very beginning, a little sponge with big dreams, dreams so bright they could light the ocean, dreams so warm they could comfort even the loneliest of hearts. And though the world had yet to see the full glow of those dreams deep within his pineapple home, they were already alive, waiting, growing, and preparing to shine. The gentle rhythm of life in SpongeBob's pineapple home was soon joined by something new, an exciting step, one that every little sponge looked forward to with wide-eyed anticipation. For SpongeBob, it was the beginning of boating school. The idea of boating school had always fascinated him. From the time he was small, he would watch older fish glide smoothly through the streets of Bikini Bottom, steering their boats with practiced ease, moving as gracefully as jellyfish drifting through the sea. To him, they seemed so confident, so free, as though the entire ocean had opened its pathways just for them. And so, as the day approached for him to take his first step into that new world, SpongeBob's heart swelled with both excitement and a touch of nervousness. The morning of his first class was calm and bright. Sunlight filtered through the waves above, turning the water into soft, golden ribbons that danced across his walls. SpongeBob rose early, far earlier than he needed to, because his heart wouldn't let him stay in bed. He dressed carefully, humming to himself as he tightened his tie just right and made sure his shoes gleamed. Today wasn't just another day, it was the start of something important. He paused for a moment by his mirror, looking at his own reflection. His eyes were wide, his smile almost too big for his face. "You can do this," he whispered softly, as though reminding both himself and the ocean around him. And then, with a deep breath, he stepped outside, ready for whatever lay ahead. The path to boating school was familiar, yet somehow different that morning. SpongeBob noticed details he had never paid much attention to before. The swaying of the kelp that lined the walkway, the small schools of fish darting past as though hurrying to their own adventures. The way the sand beneath his shoes seemed to crunch more clearly than usual. His excitement turned even the simplest of sights into wonders. As he approached the gates of Mrs. Puff's boating school, he stopped for a moment to take it all in. The building stood proudly, shaped like a lighthouse, with bright colors and cheerful flags swaying gently in the water current. The practice course stretched out beside it, filled with winding lanes, gentle turns, and carefully placed obstacles. To SpongeBob, it looked like a playground of possibilities, a place where his dreams of freedom on the open road could begin to bloom. Walking through the gate, SpongeBob felt his small hands tremble just slightly. The other students were already gathering, some chatting quietly, others standing tall with confidence. SpongeBob glanced around, taking in the variety of faces. Each student carried their own mix of nerves and excitement, though some were better at hiding it than others. And then there was Mrs. Puff. Standing near the classroom door, she greeted each student with a warm, steady smile. Her presence was reassuring, like a lighthouse guiding ships through the dark. When her eyes landed on SpongeBob, she gave a gentle nod, and though it was small, it filled him with courage. Inside the classroom, SpongeBob settled into his seat. The walls were decorated with cheerful posters about safe driving, bright images of stop signs, careful turns, and smiling students at the wheel. Each one seemed to whisper encouragement. "You can learn this too." The wooden desks gleamed under the soft light, and the faint sound of bubbling water drifted in through the windows, a calming backdrop to the moment. Mrs. Puff's voice filled the room, calm and steady, as she welcomed the class. She spoke of responsibility, of patience, and of how driving a boat wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was about caring for those around you, about making the ocean safer for everyone. SpongeBob listened intently, nodding at every word. He wanted so badly to do well, to prove himself, to turn his dream of steering a boat into something real. When it was time for introductions, SpongeBob stood proudly. His voice carried both eagerness and nervousness as he said, "My name is SpongeBob SquarePants, and I can't wait to learn everything there is about boating." A few students chuckled softly, not unkindly at his enthusiasm, but SpongeBob didn't mind. He meant every word. The rest of the morning passed in a gentle rhythm of lessons. Mrs. Puff explained the basics, how to hold the wheel, how to read signs, how to understand the flow of traffic. SpongeBob scribbled notes eagerly, his pencil darting across the page like a jellyfish gliding through the sea. Every detail seemed important, every word a key to unlocking his dream. And yet, beneath his excitement, a tiny seed of doubt sometimes stirred. What if he couldn't do it? What if steering a boat was harder than he imagined? But each time the thought bubbled up, SpongeBob reminded himself, dreams weren't meant to be easy. They were meant to be cherished, pursued, and worked for. And so he held on tightly to hope. As the first day of boating school drew to a close, SpongeBob walked slowly back toward his pineapple home. The golden light of the afternoon filtered through the water, wrapping him in a calm glow. He carried his notes under one arm and his dreams tucked safely in his heart. Today was just the beginning. He hadn't yet touched the wheel of a boat, hadn't yet faced the challenges of the course. But he knew with certainty that this was where he was meant to be. And as he stepped back into his home, SpongeBob whispered softly to himself, "Tomorrow I'll try again. Tomorrow I'll get even better." Because for SpongeBob, the first steps into boating school weren't about perfection. They were about beginning. And sometimes that was the bravest dream of all. The following morning, SpongeBob woke before the sun's rays could fully reach the ocean floor. His alarm hadn't even rung yet, but his heart was already awake, humming with excitement. He slipped out of bed, his feet patting softly against the floor as he made his way to the kitchen. A quick breakfast of kelp flakes and a glass of fresh sea foam was all he needed. His real hunger was for the lessons that awaited him. He packed his bag carefully, tucking away his notebook, pencils, and a small sandwich, just in case he got hungry later. Before leaving, he stood for a moment at the door of his pineapple home, glancing back into the quiet rooms. "Wish me luck," he whispered with a smile, as though the walls themselves were cheering him on. Then he stepped outside, ready for his second day at boating school. The streets of Bikini Bottom were quiet in the early hour, with only a few fish swimming lazily along. SpongeBob enjoyed the peaceful walk, his thoughts filled with anticipation of what he might learn. He practiced turning an imaginary wheel with his hands as he walked, making small vroom sounds under his breath. To him, it felt real already. When he arrived at the schoolyard, he noticed a few other students gathered by the gates. Some chatted quietly, while others looked around nervously. SpongeBob's face lit up, and he offered each one a friendly wave. "Good morning," he called out, his voice bright and cheerful. Some waved back, others simply nodded. But SpongeBob didn't mind. He just liked the idea of starting the day with kindness. Soon Mrs. Puff appeared, her presence calm and steady as always. She clapped her fins gently to gather the students' attention. "Good morning, class," she said warmly. "Today we will be moving beyond the basics. You've all learned about safety, about signs, and about the responsibility of driving. Today we will begin practice on the course." A ripple of excitement passed through the students, though SpongeBob's heart beat louder than most. The course, the twisting, turning stretch of sand and coral, stood just beyond the classroom walls. To him, it was not just an obstacle course. It was a doorway to his dreams. The students followed Mrs. Puff outside. The practice course gleamed under the sunlight, with orange cones marking paths, winding lanes stretching across the sand, and a few simple turns designed to test focus and control. SpongeBob's eyes sparkled as he took it all in. He could almost picture himself zooming across, steering smoothly, navigating each turn with confidence. One by one, Mrs. Puff invited students to step into the boats lined up at the edge of the course. The boats were small but sturdy, each one painted a cheerful blue. The students climbed in, their hands gripping the wheels nervously as they awaited instruction. SpongeBob watched closely as the first student took the course. The boat moved forward slowly, swerving a little, but making its way through the first turn. SpongeBob clapped quietly, cheering them on. He believed in them, just as he hoped others would one day believe in him. When it was his turn, SpongeBob felt his legs wobble just slightly as he stepped toward the boat. He climbed in carefully, his hands trembling as they wrapped around the steering wheel. It felt heavier than he imagined, solid beneath his grip. He glanced at Mrs. Puff, who gave him a reassuring smile. "Take a deep breath, SpongeBob," she said gently. "Remember what we practiced yesterday. Steady hands, calm mind. You're not racing, just guiding the boat." SpongeBob nodded quickly. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as he tried to calm his nerves. Then, with a determined smile, he turned the key. The boat hummed to life beneath him, and for a brief, glowing moment, it felt like a dream come true. He pressed the pedal gently, and the boat began to move. Slowly, carefully, it glided forward. SpongeBob's smile widened, his heart soaring with excitement. "I'm really doing it," he whispered. "I'm really driving a boat." But as he approached the first turn, his nerves got the better of him. He turned the wheel too sharply, and the boat swerved, bumping lightly into one of the cones. Mrs. Puff's voice rang out calmly. "It's all right, SpongeBob. Just straighten the wheel. Try again." SpongeBob's cheeks warmed, but he nodded quickly. He corrected the wheel, pressing the pedal once more. The boat jerked forward, then steadied. He managed to round the turn, though not as smoothly as he hoped. Each bump of the cone, each wobble of the wheel sent his heart fluttering with worry. But Mrs. Puff's steady encouragement kept him going. By the time he finished the short practice course, his boat was slightly crooked, and a few cones had tipped over. Still, he beamed with pride as he parked. "I did it," he exclaimed, climbing out. "I really did it." The other students chuckled softly, but SpongeBob didn't mind. To him, it wasn't about being perfect on the first try. It was about beginning, about facing the nerves and giving it his all. And that, he thought, was something to celebrate. As the day went on, SpongeBob continued practicing, each attempt bringing a mixture of progress and mishaps. Sometimes he turned too quickly. Other times he forgot to ease the pedal. But each mistake carried a lesson, and each lesson made him just a little bit stronger. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the day, SpongeBob walked home with a tired but happy heart. His steps were slower, his body weary, but his spirit glowed with pride. He had begun the journey, and though the road ahead was long, he knew he was ready to travel it. For SpongeBob, the first days at boating school were not about perfection. They were about courage. The courage to try, to stumble, and to try again. And that courage, he realized, was the true beginning of learning. The next few days at boating school settled into a rhythm. Each morning, SpongeBob woke with the same eager excitement that bubbled up inside him like a pot of boiling kelp soup. He polished his shoes, packed his notebook, and made the familiar walk through Bikini Bottom, humming little tunes to steady his nerves. At school, Mrs. Puff guided the class through a balance of lessons and practice. Some days focused on the written rules of the road, understanding signs, memorizing signals, and studying safety charts. Other days were spent outside, steering boats around the course. SpongeBob loved both, but he especially looked forward to the practical lessons where he could feel the hum of the engine beneath his hands and dream about one day driving with ease. Still, his excitement was often tempered by clumsy mistakes. On one morning, as SpongeBob attempted the slalom portion of the course, weaving between cones, he grew so enthusiastic that he pressed the pedal too hard. The boat jolted forward, zooming past the cones in a zigzag pattern before spinning in a wide circle. He clutched the wheel tightly, his eyes wide with panic, until Mrs. Puff calmly reached over and shut off the engine. "Steady, SpongeBob," she said gently, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Remember, it's not about speed, it's about control." SpongeBob's cheeks flushed, but he nodded quickly, scribbling the words into his notebook later. Not speed, but control. On another day, the class was practicing parking between two coral posts. The task seemed simple enough, but SpongeBob found himself misjudging the distance again and again. Each time he turned the wheel, he either scraped too close to one post or missed the space entirely. By the fifth attempt, the other students had begun watching with amused grins, but SpongeBob kept his focus. He whispered to himself, "I can do this. Just one more try." Finally, on his sixth attempt, he managed to pull the boat neatly between the posts, the bow resting just inside the lines. He jumped out of the boat, his arms raised in triumph. "Yes, nailed it," he exclaimed, his joy genuine and unshaken by the earlier failures. Mrs. Puff offered a kind smile, though she reminded him softly, "One success is wonderful, SpongeBob, but what matters most is consistency." Those words lingered in his mind. Consistency. The idea of trying not just once, but over and over, until confidence replaced chance. It became a mantra he repeated quietly to himself as he practiced. A steady anchor whenever doubt began to creep in. SpongeBob's classmates, meanwhile, were making their own progress. Some seemed to pick up the lessons quickly, steering with a natural ease that SpongeBob admired. Others struggled quietly, their mistakes smaller but still frustrating. SpongeBob, ever the optimist, often encouraged them after class. "Don't worry, you'll get it," he'd say, his voice bubbling with sincerity. And though he sometimes tripped over his own mistakes, his words carried a warmth that reminded everyone they were learning together. One afternoon, Mrs. Puff introduced a new challenge, reversing the boat. "It may seem simple," she explained, "but driving in reverse requires patience and precision. Trust your senses. Trust the wheel." SpongeBob's heart thumped with both eagerness and nerves. He climbed into the boat, gripped the wheel, and carefully shifted into reverse. At first, the boat crept backward smoothly, and SpongeBob's smile widened. But the moment he tried to turn, his hands overcorrected. The boat swung sharply to the left, bumping against the coral post with a dull thud. SpongeBob gasped, fumbling with the wheel until Mrs. Puff's calm hand guided him back to center. "Easy, SpongeBob," she said softly. "Less force, more trust. The wheel responds to gentle hands." He nodded, biting his lip, and tried again. The next attempt was better, still uneven, still wobbly, but slightly improved. Each mistake stung, but he carried Mrs. Puff's advice like a lantern in the dark. Less force, more trust. Day by day, SpongeBob filled his notebook with these lessons, writing them in careful block letters. His pages were covered with notes like, "Patience is key," and "Look where you want to go, not where you've been." The notebook became a treasure chest of wisdom, something he studied late into the evening before bed. At home, he often practiced with an imaginary wheel, turning his hands this way and that while sitting on the edge of his bed. "Gentle," he'd whisper to himself. "Steady. Patience." Sometimes Gary would meow softly from his corner, tilting his snail eyes as if watching his owner's unusual game. SpongeBob would smile sheepishly and say, "Don't worry, Gare. One day, I'll get it right." Despite the struggles, SpongeBob never let discouragement take root for long. Every mistake felt like a stepping stone rather than a wall. He celebrated even the smallest victories, like when he managed to drive straight for 5 full seconds without swerving, or when he completed a turn without bumping into anything. To him, progress, no matter how tiny, was proof that he was moving forward. And Mrs. Puff, though sometimes sighing quietly when SpongeBob's enthusiasm got the better of him, never gave up on her student. She saw his effort, his resilience, and the way he kept trying no matter how many times he stumbled. Persistence, she reminded herself, is often more powerful than talent. By the end of the first week, SpongeBob walked home each day with a mixture of exhaustion and joy. His body felt tired from the long hours, but his spirit brimmed with determination. The streets of Bikini Bottom seemed to welcome him home, the gentle sway of seaweed and the golden afternoon light reminding him that tomorrow would bring another chance. And every night, as he drifted off to sleep, he carried the sound of the boat's hum in his memory, a soft lullaby that whispered of dreams yet to be reached. The weeks passed in their steady rhythm, And SpongeBob found himself learning more than just the mechanics of boating. He was learning patience. He was learning resilience. And he was learning, perhaps most importantly, that progress was not always measured in perfect results, but in the courage to try again after every mistake. One crisp morning, the class gathered outside for what Mrs. Puff called the Circle of Trust. It was an exercise meant to test both focus and calmness. The task was simple. Drive the boat slowly around a large painted circle without veering off course. To most students, it was straightforward, but to SpongeBob, it was another chance to test his will against his nervous energy. He climbed into the boat, his notebook's advice echoing in his mind. Gentle, steady, patience. With a deep breath, he turned the key. The engine purred to life, and the vibrations traveled up through his arms. Slowly, he eased forward. The first quarter of the circle went smoothly. His hands were firm, yet soft, his gaze fixed just ahead of the path. But halfway through, nerves began to creep in. His grip tightened. The wheel jerked. The boat swerved out of the line, bumping against the boundary. A sigh escaped his lips. "Oh, barnacles." But Mrs. Puff, standing nearby, only smiled kindly. "You were halfway there, SpongeBob. That's twice as far as yesterday. Celebrate that." And SpongeBob did. He wrote it in his notebook later. Halfway today means all the way tomorrow. This became a theme of his time at boating school. Progress in increments, victory in inches. He didn't always succeed, but each day carried a new lesson, and each failure held within it the seeds of tomorrow's success. One afternoon, the class was allowed to watch a demonstration by an older student who had recently passed her test. She maneuvered the boat with calm assurance, guiding it through cones and corners as though it were a dance. Her movements were smooth, almost graceful, the boat gliding like a jellyfish across the current. SpongeBob watched in awe, his eyes wide and sparkling. He leaned forward, studying every turn, every shift of the wheel. "Ah, that's going to be me one day," he whispered softly to himself, his voice filled not with envy, but with hope. Mrs. Puff noticed the look on his face and leaned down beside him. "Dreams like that are worth holding on to, SpongeBob. But remember, even she once struggled. What matters is that she didn't stop." The words sank deep into SpongeBob's heart. He imagined the older student once sitting nervously at the wheel, fumbling just as he did. And if she could transform her stumbles into grace, then maybe, just maybe, he could too. As the weeks turned to months, SpongeBob's enthusiasm never waned. He still stumbled, of course. There were days when the boat seemed determined to defy him, zooming forward when he meant to reverse, or reversing when he meant to turn. There were moments of frustration, when his arms ached from gripping the wheel too tightly, or when laughter from classmates pricked at his confidence. But each time he bounced back. He reminded himself that failure was not the end. It was part of the journey. He often told Gary in the quiet of the evening, "One day, I'll get my license. And when I do, it'll be because I never gave up." Gary would simply blink his large eyes, offering a quiet meow that seemed to agree. Mrs. Puff, too, came to admire this resilience. Though she sometimes sighed deeply at his wild mishaps, she couldn't help but recognize the spark within him. "There's determination there," she thought more than once. And determination can outlast any setback. The turning point came on a day that began like any other. The sun's rays filtered gently through the ocean. The class gathered around the course, and SpongeBob stood with his heart fluttering in his chest. Today's exercise was parallel parking, a skill he had long wrestled with. He climbed into the boat, repeating his mantra: gentle, steady, patience. The engine hummed. He turned the wheel carefully, eased backward, and for a moment, just a brief shining moment, everything clicked. The boat slid neatly into the space between two coral posts, resting perfectly within the lines. SpongeBob's jaw dropped. His hands trembled. I did it, he whispered, almost afraid to believe it. Then louder. I did it. I really did it. The other students clapped politely, but for SpongeBob it felt like a standing ovation. Mrs. Puff's smile was genuine as she nodded. Well done, SpongeBob. That's the progress I've been waiting to see. The joy of that moment carried him all the way home. He floated through the streets of Bikini Bottom, his notebook clutched close, his heart singing. He knew it was just one success and that many challenges lay ahead. But it was proof, living, shining proof, that his efforts were not in vain. That night, as he lay in bed, the glow of his lamp casting gentle shadows across his room, SpongeBob thought back on all the lessons so far: control over speed, patience over force, consistency over chance. He whispered them softly into the dark, like lullabies for his own heart. And as sleep slowly claimed him, he dreamed not of perfect victories, but of steady, hopeful journeys. 'Cause for SpongeBob SquarePants, boating school was more than a place to earn a license. It was a place to learn about perseverance, about the beauty of trying again, and about how dreams, no matter how many bumps they encounter, are always worth chasing. And so ended the first chapter of SpongeBob's boating school days, not with a license in hand, but with something far more important: the unshakable belief that one day, through patience, resilience, and joy, he would succeed. The special kind of wonder that floats through the waters of Bikini Bottom, bright, glowing, and full of gentle mystery. For SpongeBob SquarePants, that wonder was jellyfishing. Long before he became a fry cook or dreamed of passing his boating test, SpongeBob discovered joy in the drifting dance of jellyfish. And from the moment he first saw one, shimmering softly in the current, he knew this was something magical. The memory of that first encounter stayed with him always. He had been walking through the outskirts of Jellyfish Fields with his parents on a quiet afternoon. The sun above the ocean was bright, casting beams of golden light that turned the fields into a meadow of waving seagrass. Then from the distance a soft glow appeared. A jellyfish floated into view, its body translucent, its tendrils trailing behind like ribbons in the water. SpongeBob stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide with awe. He had seen pictures of jellyfish before and heard stories from neighbors about their stings, but none of that mattered when he saw one drifting gracefully past him. It was so calm, so free, as if it were part of the rhythm of the ocean itself. He reached out a hand, not to catch it, but simply to wave, as though greeting a new friend. The jellyfish pulsed gently, as if waving back before drifting out of sight. That night, SpongeBob could hardly sleep. He lay in bed thinking about the soft glow, the delicate movement, and the sense of peace that filled him when he saw the jellyfish glide by. From that day on, he felt a pull toward Jellyfish Fields, as though the creatures themselves were calling him to explore their world. When he grew a little older, SpongeBob finally ventured there on his own. The fields stretched far and wide, rolling meadows of coral and seaweed, dotted with bright flowers that swayed in the current. The water seemed fresher there, tinged with the faint hum of jellyfish moving in great numbers. To SpongeBob, it felt like stepping into a dream. He carried with him a simple net, woven from sturdy seaweed and decorated with a little ribbon he had tied on for luck. His parents had given it to him after seeing how much he longed to go jellyfishing. "Be gentle with them," his mother had said with a smile. "They're living wonders, just like you." SpongeBob nodded solemnly at her words. To him, jellyfishing was never about catching. It was about connection. He wanted to share in the magic, not take it away. The first time he dipped his net into the current, he held his breath. The jellyfish floated close, its bell pulsing like the beat of a heart. Slowly, carefully, SpongeBob guided the net through the water. The jellyfish drifted inside, calm and unharmed, glowing softly as if curious about the little sponge who had come to meet it. SpongeBob's face lit up with joy. He whispered to the creature, thanking it for letting him hold it for just a moment. Then, just as gently, he released it back into the water. The jellyfish swirled once around him, almost like a dance, before gliding away. In that instant, SpongeBob felt as though the ocean itself had shared a secret with him. From then on, Jellyfish Fields became his sanctuary. Whenever he felt nervous, or whenever the weight of the world seemed too heavy, he would wander into the meadows and let the hum of jellyfish calm him. Sometimes he would lie on his back in the soft grass, watching hundreds of glowing bodies drift lazily across the water. Other times he would chase them lightly, laughing when they darted away, their movements quick and playful. It wasn't just the beauty of jellyfishing that drew him back. It was the peace it brought to his heart. In a world where things could feel overwhelming, where boating lessons seemed impossible, or responsibilities weighed on his small shoulders, the jellyfish reminded him that life could also be simple, slow, and full of gentle wonder. Over time, SpongeBob became skilled with his net. He could guide it smoothly through the water, catching and releasing jellyfish with ease. But more than skill, he gained patience. Jellyfishing taught him to slow down, to move gently, to respect the rhythm of the ocean rather than fight against it. Each trip into Jellyfish Fields was a lesson, not just in technique, but in life itself. And yet, for SpongeBob, jellyfishing was never a solitary joy. He longed to share it with others, to laugh with a friend as the jellyfish danced, to marvel together at the glowing skies above the fields. One day that dream would lead him to invite Patrick Starr, his best friend, into the fields for countless afternoons of jellyfishing adventures. But even before those days arrived, SpongeBob carried the memory of each jellyfish close to his heart. Every hum, every glow, every gentle sting that reminded him to treat the creatures with care. All of it formed a quiet magic in his life, a magic that would stay with him forever. Jellyfish Fields was not only a place of beauty, it was alive with its own rhythm, a song of the sea that SpongeBob quickly grew attuned to. There was the faint electric hum of hundreds of jellyfish gliding through the water, their bells expanding and contracting like breaths in unison. There was the soft swish of the seaweed meadows bowing to the gentle currents that moved through the fields, and underneath it all, a quiet stillness, a calm so deep it seemed to hush the world. SpongeBob often found himself pausing in the middle of the fields just to listen. He would close his eyes, let the net dangle loosely at his side, and breathe in the serenity. "This," he would whisper, "is what happiness sounds like." And perhaps, in his young heart, he knew that no matter what else happened in life, this place would always welcome him home. It didn't take long for SpongeBob to notice that each jellyfish seemed to have its own personality. Some were slow and dreamy, drifting as though they had all the time in the world. Others zipped and darted with surprising speed, leaving trails of light in their wake. A few were playful, circling around SpongeBob before darting just out of reach of his net. He laughed at these encounters, often tumbling into the grass as he tried to keep up. One particular jellyfish, slightly larger than the others and with a faint, pinkish glow, seemed especially fond of him. SpongeBob named it Glowy. Every time he visited the fields, Glowy would drift nearby, pulsing softly as if greeting an old friend. Sometimes it would hover above his head, casting a gentle glow over him like a lantern in the deep. Other times it would zip around him in loops, as though encouraging him to join its dance. SpongeBob adored Glowy, and he spoke to it often. "You're the best jellyfish friend I could ask for," he would say in a hushed voice. Of course, Glowy never spoke back. But SpongeBob didn't need words. He felt the connection in the way the jellyfish lingered near him, unafraid, as if it trusted him completely. The bond he felt with Glowy deepened SpongeBob's love for jellyfishing. It wasn't just about catching and releasing anymore. It was about friendship, respect, and trust. To SpongeBob, jellyfishing became a kind of conversation, one carried out in motions and glows instead of sounds. And he listened closely, always eager to learn what the jellyfish might have to say. One particularly memorable afternoon, SpongeBob ventured farther into the fields than he had ever gone before. The sun above the ocean sent long beams of golden light spilling down, illuminating the vast expanse. He found himself surrounded by jellyfish in every direction, drifting like a glowing galaxy. The sight took his breath away. Hundreds, maybe thousands of jellyfish floated together, their bells rising and falling in harmony. It was as if the sky had opened, and stars had poured down into the sea. SpongeBob stood in awe, his net forgotten at his side. He felt tiny in the vastness of it all, but not in a lonely way, in a way that made him feel part of something bigger. He sat down on a soft patch of seagrass, gazing upward as the swarm of jellyfish filled the water above him. Their bodies glowed faintly blue and pink, the light mingling with the sun's rays until the fields looked like a dream painted in color. A hush fell over SpongeBob's heart. He didn't need to move, didn't need to chase. Just being there in the presence of such quiet majesty was enough. He whispered, "Thank you," though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the jellyfish, the fields, or the ocean itself. Perhaps all three. That moment stayed with SpongeBob forever. It was the kind of memory that tucked itself into his heart, ready to surface whenever he needed comfort. Years later, when he would lie awake after another failed boating test, he would close his eyes and think back to that day, of glowing bodies floating like stars, of calm that wrapped him like a blanket, and he would find peace again. But jellyfishing was not without its challenges. There were stings, of course, little zaps that reminded SpongeBob of the creature's power. At first, the stings startled him. He would yelp, drop his net, and rub the sore spot until the sting faded. Yet he never grew angry at the jellyfish. Instead, he saw the stings as part of the lesson. "They're just protecting themselves," he would tell himself. "I have to be gentler, kinder, more patient." And so each sting became a teacher, reminding him to move slower, to respect the space of the jellyfish, and to approach with humility. Rather than drive him away, the challenges drew him closer to the heart of jellyfishing. It wasn't supposed to be easy. It was supposed to be meaningful. Every trip to Jellyfish Fields left SpongeBob with something new. Some days it was laughter, chasing playful jellyfish until his sides ached. Other days it was quiet reflection, lying among the grass and watching the jellyfish drift like living clouds. Always it was magic. Always it was joy. And in the quiet of his pineapple home at night, as he tucked Gary into bed and scribbled little notes into his jellyfishing journal, SpongeBob would smile softly to himself. He didn't know exactly why jellyfishing meant so much to him, but he felt it deep in his heart, that this was where he belonged, that this was part of who he was meant to be. For a long while, jellyfishing was something SpongeBob experienced on his own. He cherished the solitude of the fields, the quiet hum of jellyfish, and the way his heart felt calm and light whenever he wandered there. But as his love for jellyfishing grew, so too did his desire to share it. Joy, after all, always seemed brighter when it was shared with someone you cared about. That someone, of course, was Patrick Star. Patrick had always been SpongeBob's closest companion, his best friend in every sense of the word. They spent countless afternoons building sand castles, blowing bubbles, and imagining adventures that stretched far beyond Bikini Bottom. SpongeBob thought often about how much Patrick would love Jellyfish Fields, the soft grass, the glowing skies, and the playful creatures darting through the water. One afternoon, as they sat outside SpongeBob's pineapple house munching on kelp chips, SpongeBob turned to Patrick with a spark in his eyes. "Patrick," he said softly, "I want to show you something. Something really special." Patrick tilted his head, crumbs dotting his chin. "Special? Like a new ice cream flavor?" SpongeBob giggled, shaking his head. "Even better, it's magical." Patrick's eyes widened. "Magical?" He dropped his kelp chips in excitement. "Where is it? Tell me, SpongeBob. Tell me now." SpongeBob placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "It's not something I can tell you. I have to show you. Meet me tomorrow morning, and don't forget to bring your sense of wonder." Patrick saluted clumsily, grinning from ear to ear. "Aye, aye, Captain." The next morning, the two friends set out toward Jellyfish Fields, SpongeBob carrying his trusty net, and Patrick trailing behind with a much larger, clumsier one. Patrick had borrowed it from an old neighbor, insisting that if they were going jellyfishing, he needed a proper tool for the job. The net was so big it dragged across the sand, catching bits of seaweed and shells as they walked. SpongeBob led the way, his steps light with anticipation. He couldn't wait to see Patrick's reaction, to watch his friend's face light up as he experienced the wonder for the first time. As they reached the edge of Jellyfish Field, SpongeBob paused. He turned to Patrick, his voice hushed and reverent. "Before we go in, there's something you need to know. Jellyfish Fields isn't just a place. It's like a dream. And the jellyfish, they're not just creatures to catch. They're friends. We treat them with respect. We laugh with them. And when we catch them, we always let them go." Patrick nodded solemnly, though his attention wavered as he tried to untangle his oversized net from a rock. "Got it, SpongeBob. Respect, laugh, let go. Easy." Satisfied, SpongeBob smiled. Together they stepped into the fields. The effect on Patrick was immediate. His eyes widened, his jaw dropped, and he gasped so loudly that a nearby school of minnows darted away in alarm. "Whoa," Patrick whispered. Before them stretched the endless meadows of Jellyfish Fields. The water shimmered with beams of light. The seagrass swayed like gentle waves, and glowing jellyfish drifted lazily through the air. It was a living painting, a world apart from the hustle and bustle of Bikini Bottom. Patrick spun in a circle, arms spread wide. "It's beautiful," SpongeBob beamed. "I knew you'd think so." As jellyfish floated near, Patrick held out his hands, trying to catch one without his net. The jellyfish zipped away, leaving Patrick spinning clumsily in circles. SpongeBob laughed softly. "You have to be gentle, Patrick. Watch me." He demonstrated, moving slowly and carefully with his net, guiding it through the water until a jellyfish drifted inside. The jellyfish pulsed softly, glowing as if curious about him. SpongeBob smiled, whispered a thank you, and released it back into the water. Patrick watched with awe. "That was amazing, SpongeBob. I want to try." What followed was a comical series of attempts. Patrick swung his net wildly, splashing through the grass and startling the jellyfish away. Sometimes he tripped and fell into the seaweed. Other times his net would catch on a rock or tangle around his own arms. But SpongeBob never laughed at him. Not unkindly, at least. Instead, he encouraged his friend, offering gentle advice and reminding him that jellyfishing was about patience. Finally, after many clumsy tries, Patrick managed to guide a jellyfish into his oversized net. His eyes lit up with delight. "I did it! I caught one!" he shouted proudly. SpongeBob clapped his hands. "Great job, Patrick. Now don't forget the last part. Let it go." Patrick nodded, carefully tipping the net until the jellyfish floated free. The creature circled Patrick once, leaving behind a faint electric tingle on his arm before drifting away. Patrick laughed and rubbed the sting. "It tickles," SpongeBob giggled. "See, I like you." The rest of the afternoon was filled with laughter and discovery. The two friends ran through the fields, sometimes chasing jellyfish, sometimes lying on the grass to watch them drift overhead. They played little games. Who could spot the brightest jellyfish? Who could catch one with the smallest swoop of the net? Who could release theirs the fastest? Though Patrick was clumsy, his joy was boundless. Every jellyfish seemed like a new miracle to him, and SpongeBob loved seeing the fields through his friend's eyes. Sharing the experience made the magic feel even stronger. As the sun above the sea began to fade, painting the water in soft purples and golds, the two friends lay side by side in the grass. Jellyfish drifted lazily above them, glowing faintly against the twilight. "This is the best day ever," Patrick murmured. SpongeBob smiled softly, his heart full. "It really is." And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of jellyfish and the gentle glow of the fields, SpongeBob knew that jellyfishing would forever be a part of their friendship, a shared wonder, a bond that would carry them through countless adventures yet to come. The days that followed their first shared trip to Jellyfish Fields only deepened SpongeBob and Patrick's love for the pastime. What had begun as a quiet dream in SpongeBob's heart had blossomed into a shared ritual, a tradition that both friends carried with delight. Morning after morning, SpongeBob would knock on Patrick's rock, sometimes waking him from a nap that had only just begun, sometimes finding him wide awake and waiting, net already in hand. Together they would wander toward the rolling fields, their laughter echoing softly in the water, their hearts full of anticipation. The journey became just as special as the destination. SpongeBob and Patrick noticed the little things along the way, the playful crabs scuttling over the sand, the way schools of fish darted around them, the soft colors that changed as the sun rose higher above the ocean. These details made every outing feel unique, as though the sea itself was offering them small surprises to treasure. When they finally reached Jellyfish Fields, they often paused in silence before entering, soaking in the shimmering beauty. The meadows seemed to welcome them back each time, as if the jellyfish themselves had been waiting. And in many ways, SpongeBob felt they had. Not every adventure in the fields went smoothly. Patrick's clumsiness often led to humorous mishaps. Sometimes he would trip over his own net, tumbling into a patch of seagrass, sending jellyfish scattering in all directions. Other times, he would swing so wildly that his net flew right out of his hands, spinning through the water before landing several feet away. SpongeBob, ever patient, would laugh with him rather than at him. "It's not about catching them, Patrick," he reminded gently. "It's about being here with them." Patrick, rubbing a small jellyfish sting on his arm, would nod. "Yeah, and with you, SpongeBob." Those simple words meant more to SpongeBob than Patrick probably realized. Jellyfishing wasn't just about the creatures or the beauty of the fields anymore. It was about friendship, about the quiet bond between two friends who could find joy in the simplest things, even in the clumsy moments, even when nothing went as planned. There were times, too, when the jellyfish surprised them. On one particularly bright afternoon, the friends noticed a small cluster of jellyfish moving together in patterns, circling and weaving in a way that looked almost like a dance. The sight left both SpongeBob and Patrick in awe. "They're putting on a show just for us," SpongeBob whispered, his eyes wide. Patrick gasped. "Do you think they're artists?" The two sat for hours, simply watching the glowing creatures sway and drift in harmony. It was a reminder that nature often carried its own magic, one that required nothing more than patience and attention to reveal. Another time, while lying in the grass, SpongeBob felt a jellyfish land gently on his arm, resting there for several moments before floating away again. It left a faint tingle, but more than that, it left him with a feeling of connection, like the creatures somehow knew that he cared for them. He shared this with Patrick, who eagerly held out his arms, hoping a jellyfish would choose him too. When one finally did, he shouted with glee, "It likes me, SpongeBob!" SpongeBob smiled softly. "Of course it does. They always know a kind heart when they see one." As time passed, the fields became more than just a playground. They became a refuge. Whenever SpongeBob felt discouraged after a long day at boating school, or Patrick felt restless from too many naps, the two would escape to the meadows. There, among the glowing jellyfish and swaying seagrass, their worries seemed to dissolve. The gentle rhythm of jellyfish drifting by reminded them that life didn't need to be rushed. The sea moved at its own pace. The creatures followed their own paths, and everything found balance in time. It was a lesson neither friend put into words, but both carried in their hearts. As the seasons passed in Bikini Bottom, Jellyfish Fields remained constant, always glowing, always humming with life, always ready to welcome SpongeBob and Patrick back. Each visit left them with new memories, funny, joyful, sometimes clumsy, always filled with warmth. And though the friends didn't always realize it, those afternoons in the fields were shaping something deeper within them. They were learning to cherish the quiet moments, to find wonder in simplicity, to treasure the bonds of friendship above all else. For SpongeBob especially, jellyfishing became more than a hobby. It became a part of who he was, a way of life, a reminder to hold on to joy no matter what. The net in his hands was more than a tool. It was a symbol of connection, of curiosity, of his ever-bright spirit that never stopped seeking beauty in the world. One evening, as the sky darkened above the sea and the fields glowed in soft blues, SpongeBob and Patrick lay in the grass once again. Jellyfish drifted overhead, their faint light flickering like stars. Patrick sighed happily. "You know, SpongeBob, I think this might be the best place in the whole ocean." SpongeBob smiled, watching a jellyfish hover above him. "I think so too, Patrick." And in that stillness, with the water calm and the creatures glowing, the two friends drifted into a quiet peace. They didn't need words or games or even their nets. Just being there side by side was enough. The jellyfish floated gently above them, glowing like lanterns in the night, as if watching over the friends who loved them so dearly. And so the magic of jellyfishing lingered, not just in the fields, not just in the jellyfish, but in the hearts of two friends who had found a world of wonder together. In the quiet rhythm of Bikini Bottom, there are certain things that feel almost timeless. The gentle sway of the kelp forests, the drift of bubbles rising toward the surface, the laughter of friends echoing through the water. And among those timeless treasures, one humble creation stands out. A warm, simple sandwich that has captured hearts far and wide, the Krabby Patty. For SpongeBob, however, the Krabby Patty was not just food. It was destiny. But destiny does not reveal itself all at once. It begins slowly, almost quietly, like the faint glow of dawn before the sun fully rises. Long before SpongeBob ever tied on his first chef's hat, long before he stood proudly at the grill, he had only glimpses of what the Krabby Patty truly was. To him, it was a mystery, a story whispered through the town, carried by the delicious aroma that drifted from the Krusty Krab each day. As a young sponge, he often wandered near the restaurant, pausing to watch through the glass as customers filled the booths. He could see the joyful faces of those taking their first bite, their eyes brightening, their voices lifting in conversation and laughter. To SpongeBob, it looked like magic. How could something as small as a sandwich bring so much happiness? The thought lingered in his heart, tugging at him gently. He imagined what it might be like to step inside, to sit among the diners, to taste the creation that seemed to hold all of Bikini Bottom's joy in its soft, warm bun. Yet for a long time it was only imagination. He didn't rush. He was content to dream, to stand outside the Krusty Krab and breathe in the savory scent, as though it were a promise of something beautiful waiting for him. The day of his very first Krabby Patty came quietly, like most important days do. SpongeBob had been walking home from jellyfishing, his net swinging lightly at his side, when the gentle aroma caught him once again. The Krusty Krab stood proudly on the corner, its wooden sign creaking faintly as the current pushed past it. The golden letters gleamed, inviting all who passed to step in. SpongeBob paused. His heart beat a little faster. For some reason, the air felt different that day. The smell seemed stronger, warmer, almost like it was calling him in. He clutched his net close, unsure if he was ready. But then, with the courage that only dreams can provide, he stepped forward and pushed open the heavy door. The bell above jingled, and a rush of sound greeted him. Laughter, chatter, the clinking of trays, the sizzling of the grill. For a moment, SpongeBob just stood there, wide-eyed, taking it all in. The Krusty Krab was alive in a way no other place seemed to be. The red booths were full of customers, each one holding a tray with the same iconic sandwich. The scent surrounded him now, no longer distant, but filling the air around him. SpongeBob's smile grew wider, his eyes shining. He walked slowly toward the counter, his small legs almost trembling with anticipation. Behind the register stood a tall figure in a sailor's outfit, his large claws snapping as he counted coins. Mr. Krabs, though SpongeBob didn't know him personally yet, was already a legend in town. "Aye, lad," Mr. Krabs said in his deep, gravelly voice, noticing the young sponge standing there. "What can I get for you?" SpongeBob opened his mouth, but for a moment no words came. His throat felt tight with excitement. Finally, he whispered almost reverently, "One, Krabby Patty, please." Mr. Krabs chuckled, ringing the order up with the clatter of the cash register. "First one, eh? You picked a fine day for it." SpongeBob carried his tray carefully, as though it were the most precious thing in the ocean. He chose a small booth near the window where sunlight streamed through the glass, casting a golden glow across the table. There it sat before him, his very first Krabby Patty. The bun glistened softly, perfectly round. A gentle steam rose from the patty, carrying with it the unmistakable scent that had haunted his dreams. Crisp lettuce peeked out from beneath the bread, and a slice of tomato added a splash of color, like a jewel nestled within. For a long moment, SpongeBob didn't move. He just looked, his heart swelling with gratitude and awe. He thought of all the times he had dreamed of this moment, all the times he had stood outside wishing. Now it was here, right in front of him. He took a deep breath, lifted the sandwich carefully, and brought it closer. His hands trembled slightly as he took his first bite. The taste was everything and more. The flavor burst across his tongue like sunlight breaking through clouds. Warm, savory, comforting, yet full of surprises. Each ingredient blending in harmony, each bite better than the last. SpongeBob closed his eyes, letting the world fade away as he savored it. In that moment, he understood. This wasn't just food. This was joy made tangible. Laughter pressed between two buns, love folded into every layer. It was more than a meal. It was an experience, a gift. And as he chewed slowly, savoring every bite, SpongeBob knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to be part of this magic. He wanted to create something that could make others feel the way he felt now. Warm, happy, alive. The Krabby Patty wasn't just a sandwich. It was a dream, and SpongeBob had finally found his. SpongeBob sat in that booth for what felt like forever, though the minutes slipped by quietly, unnoticed. Bite by bite, the Krabby Patty disappeared, but the feeling it left within him only grew stronger. It wasn't simply that the sandwich was delicious. It was the way it seemed to fill a space inside him that he hadn't even realized was empty. He looked out the window as he chewed, watching the ocean currents sweep past, carrying little trails of sand and the occasional drifting jellyfish. Everything seemed brighter, more alive, as though the world itself had leaned closer to whisper, "This is what you were meant to discover." When the last bite was gone, SpongeBob sat back in his seat with a long, contented sigh. His small hands rested on the empty tray, and he smiled, not just with his mouth, but with his entire being. It wasn't the kind of smile that faded quickly. It was the kind that settled deep in the heart, lingering, glowing. For a while, he stayed still, soaking in the moment. Then curiosity tugged at him. His eyes wandered to the counter, to the sizzling grill behind it, where the cook flipped patties with ease and confidence. The sound of spatulas striking the metal surface, the hiss of oil meeting heat. It was like music to SpongeBob. The cook moved quickly, yet with a kind of grace, stacking buns, sliding lettuce and cheese into place, and sending tray after tray out to the hungry customers. Something stirred in SpongeBob as he watched. He realized then that the magic of the Krabby Patty wasn't just in the eating, it was in the making. Someone had stood there, at that very grill, and with their hands had created the joy he now carried inside. The thought sent a little shiver through him. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hands, and whispered to himself, "I want to do that too." As if summoned by his thoughts, Mr. Krabs' booming laugh rang out across the dining room. He had been counting coins at the register again, his eyes gleaming as the pile grew taller. But then his gaze wandered to SpongeBob, still sitting at the booth with a dreamy look on his face. "Enjoy your patty, lad?" Mr. Krabs called, his voice half curious, half proud. SpongeBob jumped a little at being noticed, but he nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. It was perfect. The best thing I've ever tasted." Mr. Krabs chuckled, clearly pleased. "Aye, that's what they all say. The Krabby Patty's more than just food, boy. It's me life's treasure." SpongeBob's eyes widened. "Treasure?" "Aye," Mr. Krabs said, his tone softening slightly as though sharing a secret. "It's the heart of this place. The reason the Krusty Krab keeps its doors open. The reason folks keep coming back with smiles on their faces. A true Krabby Patty ain't just made. It's crafted, with care, with love. SpongeBob sat in silence, his heart swelling. The words rang in him like a bell, crafted with love. That was exactly how it felt. Mr. Krabs studied him for a moment, then grinned. "You look like a lad who's got big dreams in that square head of yours." SpongeBob blushed, his cheeks turning a little pink. He wasn't sure how to answer, so he simply nodded. That night, back in his pineapple home, SpongeBob couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his hands folded across his chest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Krabby Patty in his mind, its golden bun, its savory filling, the happiness it brought with every bite. And behind it all, he saw the cook at the grill, spatula in hand, creating joy for others. SpongeBob whispered into the quiet of his room, "I want to do that. I want to make people happy. I want to make Krabby Patties." The words felt like more than just wishes. They felt like a vow. He rolled onto his side, hugging his pillow close. The sea outside hummed softly, like it was agreeing with him. The thought of the Krusty Krab filled his dreams that night. Dreams of sizzling grills, trays of smiling customers, and the warm pride of serving something that truly mattered. The following days were different. Everywhere he went, SpongeBob carried the memory of that first bite with him. At Jellyfish Fields, while chasing the gentle creatures through the current, he thought of the crisp lettuce tucked into the bun. At boating school, when his boatmobile drifted off course again, he found himself daydreaming of the sizzling sound of patties on the grill. Even when he walked through town, he caught himself glancing toward the Krusty Krab, a smile tugging at his lips. It wasn't just a meal anymore. It was a calling. SpongeBob began experimenting in his own tiny kitchen. He gathered bread, lettuce, tomatoes, and whatever odds and ends he could find, trying to recreate the magic. His hands moved with excitement, though the results were never quite the same. Some patties were too soggy, others too dry, and once or twice, his creations toppled over completely. But each time he laughed, tried again, and whispered to himself, "One day, I'll get it right." He wasn't discouraged. In fact, each mistake only made his determination stronger. To SpongeBob, the Krabby Patty wasn't just about ingredients. It was about the joy woven into it. And that joy was something he knew deep down he could learn to give. And so the first Krabby Patty was more than just a taste. It was the spark of a fire that would never go out. The beginning of a journey that would carry SpongeBob toward his true place in the world. The little sponge who once only dreamed of happiness had found his dream wrapped in a bun, waiting for him inside the Krusty Krab. And now that dream was no longer distant. It was alive, calling him forward with every beat of his square little heart. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that first Krabby Patty never dimmed for SpongeBob. Instead, it grew stronger, like a lighthouse beam shining through the ocean's currents, guiding him forward. He didn't just think about the patty anymore. He thought about what it meant. To SpongeBob, the Krabby Patty was joy you could taste. It was laughter tucked between two golden buns. It was friendship layered with lettuce and tomato. It was kindness wrapped in cheese and secret sauce. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it wasn't just food. It was a way of life. And he wanted to be part of that life. So SpongeBob began to practice. Every morning before boating school, he padded into his little kitchen, tying a dish towel around his waist like an apron. He would gather what ingredients he could: seaweed buns from the corner store, kelp patties he tried shaping by hand, pickles sliced far too thick, and lettuce that sometimes wilted before he used it. The first attempts were clumsy. His patties often fell apart, crumbling in the pan, or they burned to a crisp, while he hummed too loudly to notice. He dropped spatulas, spilled flour, and once accidentally covered his entire kitchen in a frothy wave of soap bubbles when he mistook dish soap for oil. But SpongeBob never grew discouraged. Every mistake made him giggle. He would scratch his head, adjust his tiny chef's hat, and say, "That's okay. I'll try again tomorrow." And he did. Soon Patrick caught on. One afternoon, he wandered into SpongeBob's kitchen, following the smell of something sizzling. "What are you doing?" Patrick asked, tilting his head, his eyes wide with curiosity. "I'm practicing," SpongeBob replied proudly, flipping a patty with exaggerated care. "I want to learn how to make Krabby Patties, real ones, just like at the Krusty Krab." Patrick's stomach growled loudly. "Can I try one?" SpongeBob hesitated, then nodded eagerly. He placed the slightly lopsided creation on a plate, added a pickle, and slid it across the counter. Patrick took one enormous bite. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Then he smiled. It tastes like happiness that got a little confused." SpongeBob laughed so hard he nearly dropped the spatula. "That's exactly what it is, Patrick. Happiness just not quite ready yet." From that day on, Patrick became SpongeBob's official taste tester. Each afternoon, he shuffled in, sat at the table, and waited patiently as SpongeBob experimented. Sometimes he loved the results. Sometimes his face scrunched up at the odd flavors. But no matter what, he always encouraged his friend. "You'll get there," Patrick would say with his mouth full. "I can taste the joy in it already." Word of SpongeBob's new hobby began to spread among the neighbors. Squidward, in particular, grew suspicious of the strange noises coming from the pineapple next door. Spatulas clattering, pans sizzling, and SpongeBob's laughter echoing through the water. One day, Squidward poked his head out the window and called over, "What is all that racket, SpongeBob? Are you trying to burn the ocean down?" SpongeBob looked up, still wearing his chef's hat. "No, silly. I'm practicing my patty skills. One day, I'm going to work at the Krusty Krab and make the best Krabby Patties ever." Squidward rolled his eyes. "Of course you are," he muttered. "Well, try not to poison yourself before then." But even Squidward's sarcasm couldn't dim SpongeBob's enthusiasm. If anything, it made him more determined. SpongeBob began to keep a little notebook, its cover decorated with doodles of burgers and spatulas. Inside, he scribbled his ideas. Try grilling slower. Add more lettuce crunch. Don't forget the bun should smile. To anyone else, the notes might have looked silly, but to SpongeBob, they were the beginnings of his own secret formula. Not for taste, but for joy. Cooking became his meditation. The steady rhythm of flipping patties, the gentle hiss of steam, the aroma of sizzling kelp, it all soothed him. He lost himself in the process, his heart steady and calm, as though every attempt was another lullaby to the sea. And through it all, he imagined the future. He pictured himself behind the Krusty Krab grill, spatula in hand, serving tray after tray to smiling faces. He saw Mr. Krabs nodding proudly, Patrick cheering from a booth, and even Squidward reluctantly admitting, "Well, it's edible." Those dreams gave him energy, even on the days when his kitchen filled with smoke and he had to fling open the windows. Late one evening, after another long day of experimenting, SpongeBob stood by his stove, staring at the latest patty on his plate. It wasn't perfect, still a little uneven, still missing that spark. But he knew deep down that he was closer than yesterday. He took a small bite, chewed thoughtfully, and whispered, "Almost." Then he smiled, because almost meant he was on his way. And so the boy who had once simply tasted happiness was learning how to create it, one small, messy, joyful attempt at a time. His dream was no longer a distant thought. It was alive in his kitchen, sizzling on the stove, filling the pineapple with warmth and the faint smell of determination. SpongeBob knew the road ahead was long, but that didn't matter. Every burnt patty, every toppled bun, every laugh-filled mistake was just another step closer to the moment he could stand proudly at the Krusty Krab grill. And in his heart, he already felt like a fry cook in training, guided not by perfection, but by love. One quiet morning, SpongeBob awoke earlier than usual. The sea outside his window was still and drowsy, painted in the pale colors of dawn. He stretched, yawned, and smiled, feeling a tug of excitement in his chest. Today felt different. Padding into his kitchen, he set out his ingredients with careful hands. He took his time, washing the lettuce gently, slicing the pickles evenly, toasting the buns just enough to make them golden. There was no rush. Today he wanted to cook not just with his hands, but with his heart. As the patty sizzled in the pan, SpongeBob hummed softly to himself. The melody wasn't any song he knew. It was something that rose from deep inside him, as natural as breathing. The sound of the patty cooking blended with his humming, and together they filled the pineapple with warmth. When the patty was done, he stacked it neatly, placing every layer with care: bun, lettuce, patty, cheese, tomato, pickle, and finally the top bun. He looked at it for a long time, his eyes wide, his smile small but certain. It wasn't perfect, but somehow it felt complete. That morning, SpongeBob decided to do something new. He wrapped the patty carefully and carried it out of his pineapple, stepping into the quiet streets of Bikini Bottom. The shops were still closed, the streets still empty. Only the gentle current and the soft sway of coral greeted him. He walked slowly, savoring the moment, until he found himself in front of the Krusty Krab. The restaurant wasn't open yet. Its wooden frame looked quiet and unassuming, but to SpongeBob, it shimmered like a castle. He stood there, holding his homemade patty, staring at the doors that one day he hoped to walk through. Not as a customer, but as part of the family. He sat on the curb outside, unwrapped his creation, and took a bite. The flavor washed over him like a wave. It was simple, it was uneven, it was homemade. But for the first time, he didn't compare it to the real Krabby Patty. He didn't think of what was missing. He just thought of what it was, his own creation, made with love, with patience, and with a dream guiding every step. As he ate, he imagined the future. He saw himself in a Krusty Krab uniform, spatula flashing in the kitchen light, the grill hissing as he worked. He pictured customers smiling, laughing, enjoying every bite. And in those smiles, SpongeBob saw something greater than food. He saw joy. And he knew, in that quiet moment outside the Krusty Krab, that his path was clear. Later that day, Patrick found him sitting on the curb, munching happily. "What's up, SpongeBob?" Patrick asked, plopping down beside him. "I made a patty," SpongeBob said, holding out the last bite. "It's not perfect, but it's mine, and one day I'm going to make them at the Krusty Krab for everyone." Patrick took the bite without hesitation and chewed thoughtfully. Then he smiled. "It tastes like friendship." SpongeBob giggled, his heart swelling. "That's what I hoped it would taste like." The two friends sat there for a long while, side by side, watching the morning unfold. Nothing else needed to be said. That night, as SpongeBob lay in bed, the memories of the day drifted through his mind like gentle waves. He thought of his kitchen, filled with laughter and smoke. He thought of Patrick's unwavering support, Squidward's reluctant attention, and his own stubborn determination. He thought of the Krusty Krab, waiting for him like a dream just out of reach. And most of all, he thought of that first Krabby Patty, the one he had eaten as a wide-eyed child, and the one he had made himself. 2 patties, 2 moments, connected like stepping stones across the ocean floor, leading him toward his future. His eyelids grew heavy, his breathing slowed, and a smile curved across his face as he whispered into the dark, "One day, I'll be ready." And with that thought, SpongeBob drifted into sleep, dreaming of sizzling grills, stacks of buns, and the joy he would someday share with the world. For SpongeBob, the first Krabby Patty was more than a meal. It was the spark of a destiny, the quiet beginning of a journey that would shape not just his future, but the hearts of everyone lucky enough to taste the happiness he carried in his spatula. It wasn't about perfection. It was about love. It wasn't about ingredients. It was about joy. And from that day forward, SpongeBob knew his life was meant to be lived in the kitchen with a spatula in hand, turning ordinary patties into extraordinary memories. The ocean outside whispered softly against the coral, as though agreeing with him. And deep inside, SpongeBob felt certain. The future was waiting, warm and golden, just like a Krabby Patty fresh off the grill. The sea outside SpongeBob's pineapple home often moved with a rhythm of its own, steady, calm, eternal. To many, it was just the quiet hum of the ocean. But to SpongeBob, it was like the heartbeat of the world. Each wave against the coral reminded him that life itself was always moving forward, and in his own small way, so was he. By now, SpongeBob had collected many moments, his first jellyfishing trips, his early adventures at boating school, the mornings filled with sizzling patties and dreams of the Krusty Krab. These weren't just memories to him. They were like seashells scattered along a beach, tiny treasures, each carrying a story, each reminding him of who he was becoming. Sometimes, on especially quiet evenings, SpongeBob liked to sit by his window with a notebook in hand. He didn't always write words. Sometimes he just drew. He sketched the jellyfish fields, the soft shape of his spatula, the wobbly outlines of his friends. Other times he scribbled down the little notes like, "Never stop trying," or "Smiles taste better than pickles." He laughed at his own silliness, but deep down he knew those little reminders mattered. They were like gentle anchors keeping his heart steady when the tides of life grew restless. More than anything, SpongeBob's notebook held one theme that appeared over and over: dreams. He wrote about working at the Krusty Krab, about flipping patties with perfect rhythm, about customers leaving the restaurant with full bellies and happier hearts. He imagined laughter bouncing off the wooden walls, imagined Squidward rolling his eyes behind the counter, but secretly enjoying the warmth of it all, imagined Mr. Krabs counting coins but smiling at the sight of loyal customers. To SpongeBob, the Krusty Krab wasn't just a place to work. It was a place where his heart could shine. But there was more, too. Sometimes SpongeBob dreamed about the world outside Bikini Bottom. He imagined swimming farther than he had ever dared, discovering new fields of jellyfish, new friends, and new adventures. He dreamed of exploring mysterious caves, of climbing coral cliffs, of finding new recipes that he could bring back home. His dreams stretched far and wide, like the sea itself. And yet, even as his imagination wandered, SpongeBob always felt a tether pulling him gently back. No matter how far his dreams reached, they always circled back to the pineapple, the Krusty Krab, and the friends who filled his life with meaning. One evening, Patrick came over with a bag of snacks. They sprawled out on the floor, munching contentedly, when SpongeBob opened his notebook and showed Patrick some of his doodles. Patrick studied them with wide eyes. "Wow," Patrick said between bites. "You got a lot of dreams in there." SpongeBob nodded. "Yeah. Sometimes I think maybe they're too big, but then I remember dreams aren't supposed to be small. They're supposed to fill your heart." Patrick smiled, crumbs scattered on his chin. "My dream is to finish these snacks." They both laughed, the sound echoing warmly through the pineapple walls. And even though Patrick's words were simple, SpongeBob knew they carried truth too. Dreams didn't always have to be grand. Sometimes they could be as small as finishing a bag of snacks or spending time with a friend. There were nights when SpongeBob lay awake, staring at the soft glow of his nightlight, and wondered if he would ever be ready for all his dreams. The thought of standing behind the Krusty Krab counter filled him with excitement, but also a small flicker of nervousness. What if he made mistakes? What if customers didn't like his patties? But then he always remembered his first jellyfishing trip. How clumsy he had been, how many times he had tripped and fallen, and how much he had laughed anyway. He reminded himself that dreams weren't about being perfect from the start. They were about trying, failing, learning, and trying again. The memory gave him comfort. He whispered into the quiet, "It's okay if I'm not perfect. I'll just keep trying." And with that, he would drift into sleep, his heart lighter, his dreams glowing softly around him. You see, SpongeBob's dreams weren't just for himself. He often thought about how his actions could bring joy to others. He imagined Squidward's sighs softening into genuine laughter. He pictured Patrick's wide grin as they shared another jellyfishing adventure. He thought of Mr. Krabs, proud and perhaps a little surprised at how much one sponge could care about a spatula. More than anything, he wanted his dreams to ripple outward, touching the people around him. For SpongeBob, success wasn't about being the best cook in the ocean. It was about making life brighter, warmer, and more joyful for the friends who walked beside him. And so, night after night, SpongeBob carried his dreams in his heart like glowing lanterns. They lit the path ahead, guiding him through every challenge and every triumph. He didn't know exactly where the path would lead, but he knew with a certainty as deep as the sea that his dreams were worth following. Morning always brought a special kind of magic for SpongeBob. The first beams of sunlight filtered gently through the blue water above, landing on the pineapple in a golden shimmer. As his alarm gently chimed, SpongeBob would stretch, smile, and greet the day as though it was waiting just for him. For most people, mornings were ordinary. But to SpongeBob, every new dawn felt like an unopened gift. He often thought of it as another chance to take a step closer to his dreams. Whether that step was small, like perfecting a new jellyfishing knot, or large, like practicing his spatula flips until they rang like music in the kitchen, SpongeBob cherished each one. On some mornings, he would rise earlier than the sun itself, tying his tie with extra care and rushing to the practice stove he had set up in the corner of his room. He'd hum softly as he worked, moving with a rhythm that was still clumsy but filled with determination. The scent of sizzling kelp patties filled the air, and SpongeBob imagined he was already standing behind the counter of the Krusty Krab. He didn't mind the mistakes. When patties burned, he simply laughed, reminding himself, even burnt patties have their story. When buns toppled and sauce dripped, he cleaned up cheerfully, humming all the while. He never let failure erase the joy of trying. Each attempt, no matter how imperfect, was a step closer to his dream. One particular morning, SpongeBob decided to take his practice outside. Carrying his spatula, a pan, and a small basket of ingredients, he wandered toward the Jellyfish Fields. The sun poured gently across the coral, casting dappled patterns of light on the sand. He set up his pan on a smooth rock and began to cook. The sizzle was soft, almost like a lullaby, blending with the ocean's hum. Jellyfish hovered nearby, curious about the sponge who was cooking breakfast in their meadow. SpongeBob giggled, flipping the patty with care. "This is for you, too," he told them, with a wide grin. When the aroma drifted through the water, the jellyfish bobbed closer, their tentacles glowing faintly in the morning light. SpongeBob carefully broke his patty into small pieces and offered them. The jellyfish pulsed with what seemed like delight, hovering happily around him. SpongeBob's eyes sparkled. "That's the magic of food," he whispered. "It brings us together." At that moment, SpongeBob realized that his dream wasn't only about cooking, it was about connection. The thought made his heart swell with warmth. Even though he was still a long way from the Krusty Krab, he could already feel the shape of his future in those little moments. Later that week, SpongeBob decided to share his cooking with someone else, Patrick. He invited his friend over for breakfast, proudly setting the table, with mismatched shells for plates and a driftwood spoon. Patrick sat eagerly, watching SpongeBob bustle around the kitchen. When SpongeBob finally placed a small patty on Patrick's shell, Patrick's eyes widened. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and then let out a content sigh. "This is the best thing I've ever eaten," Patrick declared, crumbs tumbling down his chin. SpongeBob beamed, his heart nearly bursting. "Really? You think so?" Patrick nodded enthusiastically. "You should make these for everyone, SpongeBob. The whole ocean would love them." Though Patrick's words were simple, they meant the world to SpongeBob. It was as if Patrick had spoken directly to his heart, confirming the very dream he carried inside. To share joy through food, to spread happiness with every bite. That was what SpongeBob wanted most. That night, SpongeBob sat by his window again, gazing out at the swaying kelp. He clutched his notebook, but instead of drawing or writing, he simply held it close, as if to remind himself that dreams were alive and breathing within him. The sea whispered softly outside, the currents brushing against the coral as though encouraging him. And in that stillness, SpongeBob made himself a promise. No matter how long it took, no matter how many tries it required, he would follow his dreams with all the love in his heart. Dreams, SpongeBob realized, were like jellyfish. They drifted gently, sometimes carried far away by unseen currents. But with patience, with kindness, and with belief, you could always follow them. Sometimes they led you into new places, sometimes back to familiar shores. And always, always, they carried a glow of wonder. So each morning and each night, SpongeBob tended to his dreams the way one tends to a small flame, carefully, lovingly, making sure it never went out. And though he didn't yet know the full story of where those dreams would lead, SpongeBob felt ready. His heart was full, steady, and glowing like a lantern beneath the waves. Because in truth, dreams weren't far-off things to chase. For SpongeBob, they were already here, nestled safely within him, waiting for their moment to bloom. As the days rolled forward like gentle waves, SpongeBob found himself thinking more often about the journey ahead. He didn't know exactly how or when his dreams would fully take shape, but that didn't trouble him. To SpongeBob, dreams were not only about destinations, they were also about the small steps, the tiny joys that came along the way. Every morning as he stood in front of his mirror adjusting his tie just so, he whispered quietly to himself, "Today is another piece of the dream." Those words gave him strength. Even if the day was filled with small setbacks like a jellyfish sting, a burnt practice patty, or Squidward's sighs, he still felt that he was moving forward little by little. One afternoon, while wandering along Goo Lagoon, SpongeBob stopped to watch the waves lap softly against the sand. Families of fish played near the water, laughter carrying across the salty air. A group of young fry were building sandcastles, piling the grains higher and higher until their structures nearly toppled. SpongeBob smiled as he watched them. Their castles were uneven, sometimes collapsing with a splash, but each time the towers crumbled, the fry didn't frown. Instead, they laughed louder, clapped their fins together, and started again. SpongeBob felt something stir in his heart. "That's what dreams are like," he murmured softly. "Even if they fall apart, you just keep building, and each time they grow stronger." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of the sea sink into him. The sound of waves reminded him of the Krusty Krab grill, of the sizzle he dreamed about each night. It was as if the world itself was reminding him, "Don't give up. Keep building. Keep dreaming." Back at home that evening, SpongeBob opened his closet and pulled out a small wooden chest. Inside lay his most treasured belongings, the first jellyfishing net his parents had given him, a seashell Patrick had once carved with his name, and the notebook where all his doodles and dreams lived. He placed the notebook on his lap, flipping through its pages slowly. Some of the drawings were messy, almost illegible, but to SpongeBob they were perfect. There were sketches of the Krusty Krab, doodles of him in a sailor's hat, and even a few playful scribbles of Squidward looking more cheerful than real life. But what stood out most were the words. Across the pages, in uneven handwriting, SpongeBob had written small sentences of hope. "Never stop smiling. A jellyfish sting hurts less than giving up. Even the smallest patty can feed the biggest dream." He ran his hand gently over the words as though they were seashells he had collected from the shore. Each note was a reminder not only of where he had been, but of where he was going. With a soft sigh, SpongeBob whispered, "One day, I'll make these dreams real." There were times, of course, when SpongeBob wondered if he was dreaming too big. He remembered how many times he had failed his boating tests, how clumsy he sometimes felt with his spatula. Those doubts were like little shadows drifting across his heart. But then, something always came along to chase them away. A smile from Patrick, a kind word from his parents, or even just the simple joy of watching the sunset turn the ocean golden. SpongeBob realized that while doubts were natural, they were never stronger than hope. To keep himself steady, he created a small ritual. Each night before bed, he would close his eyes and name 3 things that made him happy. Sometimes they were big things, like, "Patrick is my best friend." Sometimes they were small, like, "I flipped a patty without dropping it." And sometimes they were silly, like, "I made a bubble shaped like a snail." Each time he finished his list, SpongeBob smiled to himself and whispered, "That's enough for today." It was his way of reminding himself that dreams were not only made of tomorrow, they were also stitched together by the joys of today. One particular evening, as SpongeBob lay in bed, Gary curled up softly beside him, the moonlight streaming through the window. He thought about what it truly meant to dream. "Dreams aren't just about me," he whispered into the quiet room. "They're about everyone I love. They're about the jellyfish in the meadow, about Patrick and his snacks, about Squidward even when he frowns, about Mr. Krabs and his laughter. They're about Bikini Bottom. I want to share my heart with all of them." Gary purred gently in reply as if agreeing. And with that, SpongeBob drifted into sleep, his dreams carrying him gently into worlds where everything was possible, and where every heart, big or small, happy or grumpy, was part of the light that guided him. In his sleep, he dreamed of standing proudly at the Krusty Krab grill, his spatula moving like a conductor's baton, filling the air with delicious aromas and cheerful sounds. But more than the patties, more than the grill, he dreamed of the people, the smiling faces of friends, the laughter that filled the restaurant, the joy that spread outward like ripples in the sea. And when he awoke the next morning, SpongeBob's smile was even brighter, because he knew that even though it was still only a dream, it was also something real, alive within him, waiting patiently for its time. The days in Bikini Bottom continued to flow like the ocean's eternal tides, each one carrying SpongeBob a little further along his path. His heart, though still young, felt wide and open, brimming with all the light and laughter he collected each day. And some mornings he woke with a sparkle of excitement, his thoughts already racing toward what he might discover. Other mornings he woke slowly, blinking at the sunlight that filtered through his pineapple windows, stretching beneath his blankets as Gary offered a soft meow. But no matter how the day began, it always felt like a gift to SpongeBob, a chance to grow, to dream, and to share. One evening after work, SpongeBob and Patrick wandered lazily along Jellyfish Fields. The sky above them glowed in soft lavender shades as the day slipped quietly into night. Jellyfish drifted in shimmering patterns, their soft bodies glowing faintly in the twilight. Patrick, as usual, was thinking mostly about food. "Do you think jellyfish ever get hungry?" he asked, his voice slow and curious. SpongeBob chuckled gently. "Maybe, but I think they're just happy to float. They don't need much to be full, just like me. I don't need much either. Just good friends, some bubbles, and maybe a spatula in my hand." Patrick nodded, though he didn't fully understand. Still, his presence beside SpongeBob felt like a steady anchor, reminding SpongeBob that dreams were even sweeter when shared. Together, they sat on a rock, watching the jellyfish glow like lanterns in the dimming sea. SpongeBob closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the water. His heart whispered softly, "This is part of the dream, too. Not just what's ahead, but this moment right now." The truth SpongeBob was beginning to realize was that dreams were not far-off treasures waiting at the end of a long journey. They were seeds that bloomed slowly, often without notice, in the soil of everyday life. When he held a spatula and flipped a patty just right, it was a dream blooming. When he laughed until his sides hurt with Patrick, it was a dream blooming. When Squidward, even with his sighs and frowns, still shared the same neighborhood with him, it was a dream blooming. Little by little, SpongeBob began to see that his heart was already full, not of what was missing, but of what was already there. Still, he kept dreaming. At night, lying under his blanket while Gary purred at his side, he imagined all sorts of futures. Some were simple, like cooking at the Krusty Krab for the rest of his days. Others were grand, like discovering new jellyfish species or creating a Krabby Patty so perfect it became a legend. Sometimes he dreamed of traveling beyond Bikini Bottom, seeing what lay past the reefs and ridges of the ocean. Other times he dreamed of simply staying where he was, with Patrick next door, Squidward in between, and the Krusty Krab down the road. Each dream, big or small, made him smile. Because to SpongeBob, a dream wasn't about size, it was about heart. There were nights when he stayed up late, sitting at his desk by candlelight, doodling in his notebook. His sketches grew more elaborate now. SpongeBob as a great chef, SpongeBob in a captain's hat, SpongeBob smiling as the whole town enjoyed a meal together. The notebook was no longer just a collection of pictures. It was a map of his heart. Once in a while, he would pause and wonder if these dreams would ever come true exactly as he imagined. But almost instantly, he reminded himself, even if they didn't, the joy was in dreaming them. And with that thought, he always turned another page, ready to dream more. One early morning, before the sun had fully risen, SpongeBob stood at his window, gazing out at the calm waters of Bikini Bottom. The world was still, painted in shades of pale blue and silver. He pressed his hand gently against the glass, feeling the coolness seep into his fingers. Someday, he whispered softly, I'll look back at all of this and I'll realize it wasn't just a dream. It was my life. And that's the most beautiful dream of all. Gary meowed sleepily in reply, curling deeper into his shell bed. SpongeBob smiled, his eyes misty with quiet hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew his heart would never stop reaching for joy, never stop finding wonder in simple things, never stop sharing warmth with those around him. Because at his core, SpongeBob's greatest dream was not just to achieve something. It was to live with love, to laugh freely, and to fill each day with kindness. As the day began and the sea awoke around him, SpongeBob tied his tie carefully, brushed his square cheeks in the mirror, and whispered the words he always did. Today is another piece of the dream. And with that, he stepped into the world, his heart full, his smile wide, ready to carry his dreams into another day. And so, the gentle story of SpongeBob's heart is not one of grand victories or faraway places. It is the story of a little sponge who dared to dream, who found joy in the ordinary, and who discovered that the truest dreams live not in the distant future, but in the moments we hold close each day, a heart full of dreams carried quietly through the sea, lighting up Bikini Bottom like a soft lantern in the night.